They say a king without sleep becomes a monster. But what happens when the monster realizes he's been alone so long, he forgot what it felt like to be human? King Draven Kaelor ruled an empire built on fear, until one night, a servant girl who owed him nothing gave him the only thing no crown could buy: peace. This is the story of how the most dangerous alpha in the world discovered that sometimes the greatest threat to power isn't rebellion. It's remembering what you lost. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is watching. The smell hit Selene Vale before the gates even opened. Blood? Old stone. Something darker she couldn't name. The iron wagon lurched forward through Blackmere's outer walls, and she pressed her face against the bars, watching the last piece of her old life disappear behind obsidian towers that scraped the belly of storm clouds. 17 other women sat chained beside her, faces hollow from the journey north. Most were crying. A few had stopped days ago. Selene hadn't cried since her father sold her. The marketplace in her settlement had been dying for months. Crops rotted in fields no one could afford to plant. The royal tribute collectors came every season like clockwork, their ledgers thick with debts that multiplied faster than anyone could work. Her father had stood in their doorway, hands shaking, and told her the choice was simple: one daughter or the entire family burned for treason against the Iron Dominion. He'd chosen survival. She didn't blame him. Blame was a luxury for people who still had choices. The wagon stopped in a courtyard wide enough to hold a battlefield. Guards in black armor surrounded them, faces hidden behind wolf skull helmets that turned men into nightmares. One of them yanked the cage door open, and the women stumbled out onto stones worn smooth by centuries of suffering. A woman in gray robes stood waiting. Her face looked like it had been carved from the same rock as the fortress. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just studied them the way butchers studied livestock. Her name was Merrin, and she ran the servant quarters like a general commanded armies. "You are property now," Merrin said. Her voice carried across the courtyard without effort. "You will scrub floors. You will serve food. You will empty chamber pots for nobles who will never learn your names. You will do this until your debt is paid, or until you die. Those are the only two ways you leave Blackmere Citadel." A girl beside Selene, maybe 14, started sobbing. Merrin's eyes found her immediately. "Crying wastes water," she said. "Water belongs to the crown. Stop, or I'll have you sent to the mines where tears turn to dust before they hit the ground." The girl choked on her own breath, trying to swallow the sound. Merrin turned and walked toward the servants' entrance. The guards shoved them forward. Selene kept her eyes on the stones beneath her feet, memorizing the layout. The courtyard fed into a narrow tunnel. The tunnel split into 3 passages. Left went down. Right went toward kitchens she could smell from 50 yards away. Center went deeper into the citadel's belly. They went center. The walls closed in. Torches burned in sconces that hadn't been cleaned in years. Shadows moved wrong here, stretching and twisting like they were alive. Selene had heard stories about Blackmere. Everyone in the Dominion had. They said the king kept wolves in the dungeons. They said he fed traitors to them during full moons. They said alpha madness had infected the bloodline so deeply that the crown itself had become cursed. But stories were just stories until you were living inside one. Merrin stopped in front of a door that looked like all the others. She pulled a key from her belt and unlocked it. Inside was a room barely large enough for the 12 straw mattresses covering the floor. A single window, barred, let in gray light that did nothing to fight the cold. "This is home," Merrin said. "You sleep here, you wake before dawn. You work until night, you speak when spoken to, you touch nothing that doesn't belong to you, and you never ever enter the western wing without permission." One of the older women raised her hand. "Why not?" Merrin's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Something close to fear. "Because the king sleeps in the western wing," she said, "and the king doesn't sleep well." She left without another word. The women stood in silence, processing what survival looked like now. Selene claimed a mattress near the window. The straw smelled like mold, but at least she could see the sky. She'd learned in the settlement that small freedoms kept you sane when everything else got taken. A window. A glimpse of stars. A moment where you could pretend the walls weren't closing in. The girl who'd been crying earlier sat down beside her. "I'm Nessa," she whispered. "Selene, how long do you think we'll be here?" Selene didn't answer. There wasn't a good answer. Debts in the Dominion didn't get paid off. They got inherited. She'd seen families serve 3 generations trying to clear ledgers that only grew with time. The system wasn't designed for freedom. It was designed to grind people into dust, useful enough to keep the empire running. But she didn't say that to Nessa. Instead, she said, long enough to learn which guards look the other way and which ones don't. Nessa's eyes widened slightly.
You've done this before? My mother was a servant, Selene said. Different house, same chains. That was true. Her mother had worked in a magistrate's manor before she died. She'd taught Selene the rules. Keep your head down. Learn the rhythms. Find the cracks in the system and live inside them. Most importantly, never let them see you planning. Because the moment they see you planning, you're not property anymore. You're a threat. And threats got disappeared.
The first week was designed to break them. They woke in darkness and worked until their hands bled. Selene scrubbed floors in banquet halls where nobles ate food that could have fed her entire settlement for a month. She carried buckets of waste from chambers where silk sheets cost more than her father's yearly earnings. She learned the layout of Blackmere's endless corridors, memorizing which passages led where, which doors stayed locked, which guards changed shifts when. She also learned the hierarchy. Nobles ruled the court. Generals ruled the army. But inside the Citadel's walls, Chancellor Vaeric Thorne ruled everything. He was a tall man, thin as a blade, with silver hair pulled back so tight it looked like it hurt. His robes were black with gold embroidery that marked him as part of the Elder Circle. He moved through the halls like a shadow, appearing in doorways without sound, watching servants with eyes that catalogued every mistake. Selene saw him once, standing in the corridor outside the kitchens. He was speaking to a guard about something she couldn't hear. But the way he gestured, the way the guard's posture shifted from confidence to submission, told her everything she needed to know. This was a man who wielded power through fear disguised as authority. She filed that information away and kept scrubbing. By the second week, exhaustion became a constant companion. Selene's body moved on reflex, her mind somewhere far away. She ate stale bread in the servants' quarters and slept in stolen moments between shifts. The other women started to blur together. Some got sick. One disappeared after talking back to a guard. Nobody asked where she went. Nessa stuck close to Selene, following her like a shadow. How do you do it? Nessa asked one night, lying on her mattress, staring at the ceiling. Do what? Not break. Selene was quiet for a long time. You break, she finally said. You just don't let them see it. That was the truth her mother taught her. Everyone breaks. The strong ones just learn to hold the pieces together long enough to survive until tomorrow, and tomorrow, and the day after that, until survival becomes a habit instead of a choice. But the third week changed everything. Selene was assigned to the Western Wing. Merrin pulled her aside after morning assembly, her expression unreadable. You'll be cleaning the royal chambers tonight, she said. Selene felt ice settle in her stomach. I thought we weren't allowed. You're not, Merrin interrupted. But the king's usual servant is ill, and you're the only one left who hasn't tried to run yet. Selene wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but refusal wasn't an option when you were property. What do I do? She asked. Merrin handed her a ring of keys and a list written in sharp, angry handwriting. Follow this exactly. Do not deviate. Do not touch anything except what's listed. Do not make noise. The king will not be there. He'll be at the War Council until midnight. You'll be done long before he returns. And if I'm not? Merrin's face hardened. Then you'll learn why 3 noble women are dead. She walked away before Selene could ask what that meant. Night fell over Blackmere like a curtain dropping on a stage. Selene stood outside the Western Wing's entrance, heart hammering in her chest. The door was massive, carved with wolves tearing apart stags, blood rendered in such detail it looked wet. She slid the key into the lock. It turned with a sound like bones cracking. The hallway beyond was different from the rest of the citadel, colder, darker. The torches burned blue instead of orange, and the shadows didn't move right. Selene walked slowly, counting her steps, following Merrin's instructions. 12 doors lined the corridor. The list said she was to clean the 8th one on the left, the king's private chamber. She reached the door and hesitated. Somewhere deep inside the citadel, a wolf howled. The sound crawled under her skin and settled in her bones. It wasn't a normal howl. It was too human, too broken, like something caught between two shapes and screaming because it couldn't choose. Selene pushed the door open. The room inside was massive. A bed large enough to hold 5 people dominated the center, covered in furs that looked like they'd been ripped from animals while they were still alive. Weapons lined the walls, swords, axes, spears, all of them stained dark with use. A fireplace big enough to burn bodies sat cold and empty, but it was the smell that made her stomach turn. Blood, sweat, something wild. She started cleaning. The list was specific. Change the furs, empty the chamber pot, scrub the floor around the bed. Do not touch the weapons. Do not open the wardrobes. Do not look in the chest at the foot of the bed. Selene worked quickly, keeping her eyes down, but exhaustion was a predator, and it had been hunting her for weeks. She finished the floor and sat down on the edge of the bed just for a moment, just to catch her breath. The furs were softer than anything she'd ever touched. Warm, heavy, the kind of luxury that made you forget you were supposed to be suffering. She told herself she'd rest for 1 minute. Her body had other plans. She woke to the sound of breathing, not hers. Selene's eyes snapped open, and her blood turned to ice. She was lying in the center of the massive bed, curled against something warm and solid. Her brain screamed at her to move, but her body was frozen in terror, because the warmth against her back was a man. No, not a man. The king. Draven Kaelor was unconscious, one arm draped over her waist like she was something he'd claimed. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. His face, inches from hers, looked younger in sleep. The hard edges softened, the scars less brutal. He looked almost human. Almost. Selene's heart tried to beat its way out of her chest. She needed to move, needed to run, needed to get out before he woke up and killed her for trespassing. But the arm around her waist was solid as iron, and any movement would wake him. So she lay there, barely breathing, watching the window as dawn crept across the sky. And slowly, impossibly, she realized something. The king was sleeping, really sleeping. Not thrashing, not growling, not shifting into the half-wolf form the stories described, just breathing, peaceful. Like a man who'd been drowning finally found air. Hours passed. Light filled the room. And still, he didn't wake. Neither did she move. Because some instinct deeper than fear told her that if she broke this moment, something terrible would follow. Finally, voices echoed in the hallway outside. Guards, servants, the daily shift change. The sound seemed to pull Draven from sleep. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first. Then they found her. Gray eyes, cold as winter. Selene stopped breathing. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Draven spoke, his voice rough from disuse. "Who are you?" "Selene," she whispered. "I'm a servant. I was cleaning. I fell asleep. I'm sorry. I'll leave. Please don't." He sat up and she scrambled backward, pressing against the headboard. But he didn't reach for a weapon. He just stared at her, expression unreadable. "How long was I asleep?" he asked. Selene's mind raced. "I don't know. Hours. Since before midnight, I think." Something shifted in his face. Shock. Disbelief. "Hours," he repeated, like the word was foreign. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city below. Selene didn't move, didn't speak, just waited for whatever happened next. When he finally turned back, his expression had hardened into something colder. "Get out," he said. She didn't need to be told twice. Selene ran. She didn't stop until she reached the servants' quarters, heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode. Nessa grabbed her shoulders, eyes wide. "What happened? Where were you?" But before Selene could answer, Marin appeared in the doorway. "You," she said, pointing at Selene. "Come with me." Selene's stomach dropped. She followed Marin through corridors that seemed darker now, more oppressive. They stopped outside a small room she'd never seen before. Inside, Chancellor Vaeric Thorne stood waiting. He studied her with those calculating eyes. "Sit," he said. Selene sat. Vaeric circled her slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "Do you know why you're here?" "No, my lord. The king slept last night," Vaeric said. For the first time in over a year, he slept without incident. No rage, no shifting, no destruction. His guards reported finding him this morning calm, rested. "And you were in his chambers. Selene's mouth went dry. I was cleaning. I fell asleep by accident. I didn't mean... Vaeric held up a hand. I don't care what you meant, he said. I care what happened, and what happened is unprecedented. He leaned forward, studying her face like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. You will return to the Western Wing tonight, he said. You will enter the king's chambers. You will see if the pattern repeats. Selene's blood turned cold. My lord, I can't... You can, Vaeric interrupted. And you will. Because if you don't, I'll have you sent to the southern mines where the sun doesn't reach and the air tastes like iron. Do we understand each other? Selene nodded, throat too tight to speak.
Good, Vaeric said. Dismissed. That night, Selene stood outside the Western Wing again. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door. The hallway stretched before her like a throat waiting to swallow her whole. She walked to the 8th door, pushed it open. Draven was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. He looked up when she entered. They told you to come back, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Why? Selene didn't know how to answer that.
Draven stood and she flinched, but he just walked to the fireplace and started building a fire, movements mechanical.
I haven't slept in over a year, he said quietly. Not real sleep. The wolf doesn't let me. It's always there, clawing at the edges, trying to break free. I wake up covered in blood I don't remember spilling. I destroy rooms, hurt people. They brought me 3 noble women to marry. All of them ended up broken because the beast inside me couldn't recognize the difference between a threat and a person. He lit the fire. Flames caught and spread.
But last night, he continued, I slept. Really slept. And when I woke up, you were there. He turned to face her, and his expression was stripped of everything except exhaustion. So tell me, Selene Vale, what the hell did you do to me? Selene met his eyes, and for the first time since entering Blackmere, she told the complete truth. Nothing, she said. I just fell asleep. Draven stared at her for a long time. Then he said, do it again. And she did. Night after night, Selene returned to the Western Wing. At first, she lay on the floor beside the bed, too terrified to do anything else. But Draven never touched her, never threatened her. He just lay down, closed his eyes, and slept. And slowly, the monster stories started to crack, because the man in that room wasn't a beast. He was someone who'd been alone so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be safe. And somehow, impossibly, Selene made him feel safe. By the 2nd week, she stopped sleeping on the floor. By the 3rd week, they started talking. Tell me about your settlement, Draven said one night, staring at the ceiling. So she did. She told him about fields that used to grow wheat before the tribute taxes bled them dry. About her father who'd been a carpenter before his hands started shaking too badly to work. About her mother who'd died serving a system that never cared if she lived. Draven listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I didn't build this empire. I inherited it. My father believed fear kept kingdoms strong. He crushed rebellions before they started, burned settlements that questioned tribute. I watched him do it my entire childhood, and I swore I'd be different. But then he died, and I put on the crown, and the wolf inside me woke up. It's been awake ever since. Why? Selene asked. He turned his head to look at her. Because being a king means becoming the thing you hated, he said, or watching your empire collapse. Those are the only choices. Selene thought about that. Then she said, what if there's a 3rd option? Draven's expression darkened. There isn't. But even as he said it, something in his eyes suggested he wanted to be wrong. The palace began to notice. Servants whispered about the king's changing mood. Guards reported that the Western Wing had stopped sounding like a war zone. Nobles in the court started asking questions, and Chancellor Vaeric watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. He summoned Selene again. This time, his expression was harder, colder. You've become important to the king, he said. That makes you dangerous. Selene kept her face neutral. I'm just a servant, my lord. You're a variable I didn't account for, Vaeric corrected, and I've spent years managing this kingdom by removing variables. So let me be clear. You will continue serving the king. You will report his mood to me every morning, and you will never forget that your life exists at my discretion. He leaned forward. Do we understand each other? Yes, my lord. But as Selene left his office, she realized something that terrified her more than any threat. Vaeric wasn't trying to help the king. He was trying to control him, and she'd just become a piece in a game she didn't understand. That night, Selene entered the western wing and found Draven standing at the window, fully armored. "There's been a report of border raids in the eastern territories," he said without turning. "I'm leaving at dawn." "For how long? A week? Maybe longer." Selene felt something cold settle in her chest, something she didn't want to name. Draven turned to face her. "Vaeric will try to question you while I'm gone," he said. "Don't tell him anything he can use." "Use for what?" Draven's jaw tightened. "He wants me unstable," he said. "A controlled monster is easier to manipulate than a thinking king. If I become human again, I become unpredictable. And unpredictable rulers are dangerous to people who've built power on managing madness." He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. "Stay alive," he said quietly. "That's an order." Then he left, and Selene stood alone in the massive chamber, feeling the walls close in. The week that followed was the longest of her life. Vaeric summoned her daily, asking questions that felt like traps. The other servants started avoiding her, like being near her might draw dangerous attention. Nessa stopped talking to her entirely. And every night, Selene returned to the empty western wing and tried to sleep in a bed that felt too big without the king's presence. On the 7th day, news arrived. The border raids had been real. Draven's forces had engaged enemy scouts. 3 villages burned, 50 soldiers dead. But the king was returning. Selene stood in the courtyard with the other servants as the gates opened. Draven rode through on a black warhorse, armor covered in mud and blood. His face looked carved from stone. Behind him, the remains of his company followed, exhausted and broken. He dismounted and walked past everyone without a word, heading straight for the western wing. Selene waited until nightfall, then followed. She found him sitting on the floor in front of the fireplace, still in his armor, staring at flames. "Are you hurt?" she asked quietly. "No." She sat down beside him, not touching, just close enough that he knew she was there. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Draven said, "I killed a boy today. 16, maybe younger. He came at me with a spear, terrified, and I cut him down without thinking. Afterward, I found a letter in his pocket. He was writing to his mother, telling her he'd be home soon. His hands clenched into fists. I didn't even see his face until after he was dead." Selene didn't have words for that, so she just stayed. And eventually, Draven's breathing steadied. His shoulders loosened. He stood, removed his armor piece by piece, and lay down on the bed. She lay beside him, and he slept. But this time his sleep was fractured. He shifted, muttered words she couldn't understand. Once he reached for her in the dark, like he was making sure she was still real. She took his hand and held it until morning. When dawn came, Draven woke looking more exhausted than when he'd fallen asleep. But he didn't let go of her hand. "I'm tired," he said quietly. "Not from the battle. From being this." "Being what?" "King. Monster. Whatever I'm supposed to be." Selene squeezed his hand. "You're a man," she said. "The rest is just what they made you carry." Draven's expression cracked just for a second. Then he pulled his hand away and stood. "Get out," he said. His voice was cold again, controlled. Selene stood. "Why?" "Because if you stay, I'll start believing you," he said. "And belief is dangerous for men like me." She wanted to argue, wanted to stay. But she left, because she understood. Hope was the most dangerous thing in the world for someone who'd learned to survive without it. And King Draven Kaelor had survived by becoming something that didn't need hope. Until now. 3 days later, Chancellor Vaeric made his move. He called an emergency session of the Elder Circle. Selene was dragged from the servants' quarters by guards and thrown into a chamber she'd never seen before. Stone walls, no windows, a single table where 12 men in black robes sat waiting. Vaeric stood at the head of the table. "Selene Vale," he said, "you stand accused of using forbidden magic to manipulate the king." Selene's blood turned to ice. "What?" "Witnesses report that you've been entering the Western Wing nightly," Vaeric continued, "that the king's behavior has changed since your arrival, that you've created an unnatural bond with an alpha ruler through methods unknown. This is a crime punishable by death. One of the other council members leaned forward. Do you deny these accusations? I'm a servant, Selene said, voice shaking. I clean his chambers. That's all. Then explain why the king sleeps only in your presence, Vaeric said. Explain why his wolf has not killed you when it destroyed 3 noblewomen trained specifically to handle alpha dominance. Selene had no answer, because the truth was, she didn't know. Vaeric smiled. It was the smile of a predator who'd cornered prey. You will be held in the Citadel dungeons until the king returns from his northern inspection, he said. Then he will decide your fate himself. Wait, Selene said. He doesn't know about this? Vaeric's smile widened. The king left 2 hours ago on urgent business I arranged, he said. He won't return for 3 days. Plenty of time for justice. Guards grabbed her arms, and as they dragged her toward the dungeon, Selene finally understood. This wasn't about magic. This was about control. Vaeric had spent years keeping Draven unstable because a broken king was a manageable king. But a king who'd found peace? A king who'd remembered what it felt like to be human? That king was a threat to everyone who'd built power on his madness. And Selene was the crack in the foundation. So they were going to bury her before the whole structure collapsed. The dungeon smelled like death. Guards threw Selene into a cell barely large enough to stand in. Water dripped from stones overhead. Something skittered in the darkness. She pressed her back against the wall and tried not to scream. Hours passed. Maybe days. Time stopped meaning anything. Then, deep in the citadel above, a sound echoed through the stone. A howl. Not animal. Not human. Something caught between. And Selene knew, with absolute certainty, that Draven had returned early and discovered what they'd done. The citadel shook. Screams echoed through the corridors above. Steel rang against steel. Something massive slammed into stone hard enough to crack foundations. Then silence. Footsteps approached her cell. Slow. Deliberate. A shadow fell across the bars. Selene looked up and saw King Draven Kaelor staring at her through the iron. His eyes were no longer gray. They were gold. The wolf had woken up, and this time it wasn't going back to sleep until blood paid for what had been taken. Draven's hand closed around the bars, and they bent like clay. Who did this? His voice was barely human. Selene's throat closed. Because she knew if she spoke the name, the empire would burn. But she also knew that some fires needed to burn. Vaeric, she whispered. Draven's expression didn't change. He just turned and walked back toward the stairs, and Selene heard the exact moment the Alpha King declared war on his own court. It sounded like the end of the world. The sound that came from above wasn't rage. It was something colder. Selene pressed herself against the cell wall, listening to footsteps echo through stone corridors that had witnessed 1,000 deaths. Draven's boots struck the floor with mechanical precision. No rushing, no chaos. Just the steady rhythm of a predator who'd already decided how the hunt would end. Then the screaming started. Not from Draven, from the guards. Metal scraped against stone. A man's voice cut off mid-sentence. Something wet hit the floor. Selene's hands shook as she gripped the bars Draven had bent, her mind racing through possibilities that all ended the same way. The citadel was about to drown in blood, and she'd given him the name. More footsteps. Multiple sets. Running. Someone shouted orders she couldn't make out. Steel rang against steel in sharp, brutal exchanges that lasted seconds before silence swallowed them. The wolf inside Draven wasn't just awake. It was hunting with purpose, stripping away everything except the most primal form of justice. You take what's mine, you pay in pieces. That was the law of alphas. The law Draven had been fighting his entire reign. The law he'd just stopped fighting. A guard appeared at the end of the dungeon corridor, face pale, uniform torn. He saw Selene through the bars and froze. You, he said, voice cracking. You did this. Then he ran. Smart man. The dungeon fell silent again. Selene counted her heartbeats, got to 40 before new footsteps approached. Slower this time. Heavier. She knew who it was before he appeared. Draven stood outside her cell, and everything about him had changed. The armor was gone. His shirt hung open, revealing skin marked with scars that looked older than they should. Blood covered his hands, not his blood. His eyes were still gold, but the rage had crystallized into something sharper, more controlled. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, stripped of the formal tone he used in court. This was the voice of a man who'd stopped pretending. Selene shook her head. "No." Draven's jaw tightened. He reached for the cell door and the lock shattered under his grip like it was made of clay. The door swung open. He stepped back, giving her space. "Come with me." It wasn't a request. Selene stepped out of the cell, legs shaking. The corridor outside was empty except for bloodstains that painted a trail back toward the stairs. She followed Draven up through passages that had gone eerily quiet. Servants had disappeared into walls. Guards had abandoned their posts. The citadel felt like a held breath. They emerged into a hallway she recognized, the one leading to the throne room. Draven stopped at the massive doors and turned to face her. "What I'm about to do," he said quietly, "will change everything. There's no coming back from it. If you walk through these doors with me, you become part of this. Do you understand?" Selene met his eyes. "Part of what?" "A reckoning," Draven said. "The kind that doesn't end until everyone who built this system on suffering answers for it." He pushed the doors open. Inside, the throne room had been transformed into a courtroom. Chancellor Vaeric stood in the center, surrounded by 12 members of the Elder Circle. All of them wore formal robes. All of them looked like they'd been summoned in a hurry. Royal guards lined the walls, but their expressions were uncertain, torn between duty and survival. At the far end of the room, the Iron Throne sat empty. Draven walked toward it with Selene at his side. Vaeric's face remained calm, but his hands betrayed him. They were clasped too tight, too still. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, "I'm glad you've returned. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." "Was I unclear?" Draven interrupted. His voice carried across the throne room without effort, the kind of voice that had commanded armies, ended rebellions, silenced dissent with nothing but presence. Vaeric's mouth closed. Draven stopped 10 feet from the Chancellor and turned to address the entire room. "For over a year," he said, "I've been told my condition was a curse, that the wolf inside me was madness inherited from my bloodline, that the only way to manage it was isolation, control, and enough fear to keep me from destroying the kingdom." He looked at Vaeric. "You sold me that story. You and the Elder Circle. You convinced me I was a monster who needed handlers, and I believed you, because when you're drowning, you grab whatever rope gets thrown." One of the Elder Circle members stepped forward, an older man with a gray beard and robes marked with military insignations. "Your Majesty, we acted in the kingdom's best interest." "You acted in your own interest," Draven cut him off. "A stable king asks questions. A broken king signs orders. Which one benefits men who want power without accountability?" The room went silent. Draven turned back to Vaeric. "I want you to answer one question honestly," he said, "and we both know you're smart enough to understand what happens if you lie." Vaeric's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Calculation. The kind that happened when a predator realized it might be prey. "Ask," he said. "Did you arrange for Selene to be imprisoned to keep me unstable?" The question hung in the air like smoke before a fire. Vaeric was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "Yes." Gasps rippled through the Elder Circle. Several members stepped back. One of the guards near the door shifted his grip on his spear, but Vaeric kept talking. "Your father understood something you refused to accept," he said. "Kings don't rule through compassion. They rule through strength. Your condition made you powerful, terrifying, effective. The moment you started recovering, you became weak. Human. And human kings die in their sleep while stronger men take their crowns." He spread his hands. "I kept you alive, Your Majesty. Everything I did was to preserve your throne. If that required managing your stability, then yes, I managed it." Draven stared at him. Then he started laughing. It was a sound without humor, the kind of laughter that came from realizing a joke had been running for years, and you'd been the punchline the entire time. "You kept me alive," he repeated. "That's your defense." Vaeric's chin lifted. "I kept the kingdom alive," he corrected. "Your instability made you unpredictable to enemies. Powerful nobles stayed in line because they feared what you might do. Border territories paid tribute without question. You were the monster the Empire needed. And now? Draven asked softly. Now you're becoming the king the Empire doesn't need, Vaeric said. A man who hesitates, who questions, who feels. He took a step closer. Tell me, Your Majesty, when you hesitated before killing that boy on the eastern border, did it bring him back, or did it just make you weaker? The throne room went absolutely silent. Selene saw Draven's hands curl into fists. You knew about that, he said. I know about everything, Vaeric replied. It's my job. And yes, I knew you were struggling with the weight of that death. I also knew it would pass, because kings carry weight until it crushes them, or until they learn to stop carrying it at all. Your father understood this. He stopped caring about individual deaths after his first border campaign. You need to do the same. Draven took a step forward. My father, he said, died screaming in his own bed because the monster he became finally turned on him. Vaeric didn't flinch. Your father died because someone poisoned his wine, he said. But you already knew that, just like you know who gave the order. The room fractured. 3 of the Elder Circle members started talking at once. Guards shifted positions. Someone near the back of the room moved toward the door. Draven raised one hand, and everyone froze. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper. Say that again. Vaeric met his eyes without fear. Your father was murdered, he said clearly, by members of this council who believed his madness had become uncontrollable. They came to me for approval. I gave it, because a dead king is better than a mad one. Selene felt the floor drop out from under the world. Draven stood perfectly still. Then he said, Who else? Vaeric tilted his head slightly. Does it matter? They're all dead now. Heart attacks, hunting accidents, sudden illnesses. Power doesn't forgive witnesses, Your Majesty. Surely you understand that. Draven's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. The gold in his eyes flared brighter. You killed my father, Draven said. Then you spent years breaking me into the same monster he became. And when I finally found something that pulled me back from that edge, you tried to destroy it. He turned to look at Selene. You tried to destroy her. Vaeric followed his gaze. She's a servant girl who stumbled into circumstances she doesn't understand, he said. Nothing more. Draven turned back to him. She's the only reason I'm still human, he said. And you put her in a cell to rot. Vaeric's composure finally cracked. Just slightly. Then let me be clear, Your Majesty. If you execute me for protecting this kingdom, you'll start a civil war. Half the noble houses answer to the Elder Circle. The military command is split. You'll tear the Dominion apart over a woman who means nothing in the grand scheme of power. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Or you can be smart. Send her away. Quietly. No execution. No scandal. She disappears into some distant territory with enough coin to live comfortably. You maintain stability. The kingdom survives. Everyone wins. Draven was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze blood. You're right about one thing, he said. This choice will define my reign. He walked past Vaeric toward the throne and sat down. The Iron Throne had been forged from weapons taken from defeated enemies. Swords, axes, spears, all of them melted and twisted into a seat that cut anyone who sat carelessly. Draven leaned back against blades that had drawn blood from lesser kings and studied the room. Vaeric turned to face him, expression cautiously hopeful. Draven's eyes found the royal guards lining the walls. Arrest Chancellor Vaeric Thorne, he said, along with every member of the Elder Circle present in this room. Charge them with conspiracy, murder, and treason against the crown. The room exploded. Elder Circle members shouted protests. Some tried to run. Guards moved to intercept, but half of them hesitated, looking between the Chancellor and the King like they couldn't decide which authority to follow. Vaeric raised his voice above the chaos. This is madness! You'll destroy everything your bloodline built! Draven stood. My bloodline built an empire on fear and corpses, he said. Maybe it's time to burn it down. He descended the throne steps slowly. You wanted me unstable because broken kings are easier to control. You murdered my father because he became inconvenient. You imprisoned an innocent woman to keep me isolated, and now you're threatening civil war because I won't follow your script. He stopped in front of Vaeric. So let me give you a different script, he said. You're going to stand trial, publicly. Every crime you committed will be documented. Every noble house that participated will be exposed. And when the kingdom sees exactly what kind of men have been running things while I fought my own mind, they'll understand why the system needs to burn. Vaeric's face had gone pale. You're choosing her over the kingdom, he said. Draven's expression was carved from stone. I'm choosing accountability over corruption, he said. If that destroys the kingdom, then the kingdom deserved to die. He turned to the guards who hadn't moved. Anyone who stands with the Chancellor will be treated as a traitor, he said. Anyone who stands with the crown will be rewarded. Choose now. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one guard stepped forward, then another, then a dozen. The Elder Circle members who'd tried to run were surrounded and brought to their knees. Vaeric stood alone in the center of the throne room, watching his carefully constructed empire collapse in real time. He looked at Draven with something close to respect. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. Draven met his eyes. Probably, he agreed. But it's my mistake to make. Guards moved to restrain Vaeric. He didn't resist, just kept his eyes on the king as chains were fastened around his wrists. As they led him toward the dungeons, he called back over his shoulder, "She'll be the death of you, your majesty. Mark my words." Draven didn't answer. He just watched until Vaeric disappeared from sight. Then he turned to Selene, and his expression shifted into something more human, more exhausted. "Come with me," he said. They walked through corridors still stained with blood from Draven's initial rampage. Servants peeked out from doorways, eyes wide. News was already spreading. The Chancellor arrested, the Elder Circle in chains, the king declaring war on his own government. The Empire would wake tomorrow to a world that had changed overnight. Draven led Selene to the western wing, to his chambers. He closed the door behind them and leaned against it, suddenly looking every year of his age. "I just sentenced myself to a war I might not win," he said. Selene stood in the center of the room, still processing everything that had happened. "Why?" she asked. Draven looked at her like the question was absurd. "Because they hurt you," he said simply. "That's not a reason to risk a kingdom. It's the only reason that matters." He pushed off the door and crossed to the window, staring out at the city. "For years, people told me I was a monster," he said. "That the wolf made me dangerous, unpredictable. But you want to know what I realized tonight?" "What?" "The wolf isn't the dangerous part," he said. "The man is. Because the wolf acts on instinct. But the man chooses. And I chose to burn down everything that tried to take you away from me." He turned to face her. "So yes, I started a war. And no, I don't know if I'll win. But I'd rather fight and lose as a man than rule and win as a monster." Selene crossed the room and stopped in front of him. "You could have sent me away," she said, like Vaeric suggested. "I would have gone. You would have kept the kingdom stable." Draven's eyes searched her face. "I know," he said. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I'm tired of surviving by losing pieces of myself," he said. "My father did that. He cut away everything human until only the crown remained. I won't become that." His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently touched her face. "You're the first thing in years that made me feel like more than a weapon," he said quietly. "I'm not giving that up. Not for a kingdom, not for an empire, not for anything." Selene felt something break open inside her chest. She'd spent her entire life learning to survive by becoming invisible, by accepting that people like her didn't matter in the grand scheme of power. But standing here, looking into the eyes of the most feared alpha alive, she finally understood something. Mattering to one person was more powerful than being forgotten by thousands. "I don't know how to be what you need," she said honestly. Draven's thumb brushed her cheek. "You already are," he said. "You're the reason I'm still here." They stood like that for a long time. Then Draven stepped back, and the moment broke. "You need to sleep," he said. "Tomorrow starts a war. You'll need your strength. What about you?" "I'll stand guard," he said. Old habit. Selene didn't argue. She lay down on the massive bed, still wearing the servant's dress she'd been arrested in. Exhaustion hit like a physical force. Her eyes closed. But before sleep took her completely, she heard Draven speak softly from near the window. "I meant what I said. I'd burn the kingdom for you." And Selene believed him. Because some promises weren't made with words. They were made with choices. And Draven Kaelor had just chosen her over everything. Morning came with bells, not celebration bells, warning bells. Selene woke to chaos filtering through the windows. Draven was already dressed in full armor, standing at the war table in the corner of his chambers. Maps covered the surface. Markers indicated troop positions. He looked up when he heard her stir. "It's starting," he said. "What is?" The response. He gestured to the maps. 3 noble houses have declared rebellion. 2 more are considering it. The military is split down the middle. Half want to rescue Vaeric. Half want to see him hang. We have maybe a week before this turns into open warfare. Selene sat up, mind racing. "What do you need?" Draven looked at her, expression complicated. "I need you safe," he said. "Which means you need to leave the Citadel." "No." "It wasn't a request, Selene." "I don't care," she said, standing. "You started this war because of me. I'm not running while you fight it." Draven's jaw tightened. "You're not a soldier. Neither were you, until someone put a crown on your head and told you to become one. That's different. Why? Because I'm a servant? Because I don't know how to hold a sword?" She crossed to the war table and looked at the maps. "I know how to listen," she said. "I know how to watch. I spent my entire life invisible, learning which nobles were lying, which servants were loyal, which guards could be bribed. You want to fight a war? Fine, but wars aren't won just by swords. They're won by information." Draven stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression. Recognition. "You want to spy," he said. "I want to help," she corrected. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "If I agree to this, you follow orders. No heroics. No risks I don't approve. The second things get too dangerous, you disappear. Understood?" "Understood." Draven turned back to the maps. "Then we start with the servants," he said. "They see everything, hear everything. If we can turn the Citadel's invisible network to our side, we'll know about rebellions before they happen." Selene felt something click into place. This was how she survived, not by becoming visible, by making visibility a weapon. The next 3 days were a blur of carefully orchestrated chaos. Selene moved through the Citadel like a ghost, talking to servants in hallways, kitchen workers during shifts, stable hands between duties. She offered them something simple but powerful. A choice. Stay loyal to the old system and hope the nobles who'd exploited them for generations would protect them when the war came. Or stand with a king who'd just burned down his own government to protect a debt servant. Most chose the second option. Because people don't follow power. They follow the person who sees them as human. Within 2 days, Selene had built a network of eyes and ears throughout Blackmere. She learned which nobles were meeting in secret, which guards were taking bribes, which merchants were stockpiling weapons. Every piece of information went straight to Draven. And slowly, the balance of power started to shift. On the 3rd night, Selene was returning from the kitchen quarters when she heard voices in a side corridor. She pressed herself against the wall and listened. 2 men, both wearing noble colors. "The trial is set for tomorrow," one said. "If Vaeric talks, half the court will hang." "Then we make sure he doesn't talk," the other replied. "How?" The second man's voice dropped lower. "Poison. During the transfer to the courtroom, make it look like suicide." Selene's blood ran cold. She waited until they left, then ran. She found Draven in the war room with 3 of his generals. She burst through the door without knocking. "They're going to kill Vaeric before the trial," she said. All 4 men turned to stare at her. Draven's expression hardened. "Who?" She didn't get names, but she described what she'd heard. The generals exchanged glances. One of them, a scarred man named Kellian, spoke up. "If Vaeric dies before testifying, we lose our evidence. The rebellion will claim we executed him in secret. It'll be the spark they need to justify war." Draven's hands flattened on the table. "Then we move the trial up," he said. "Tonight." "Your Majesty, that's—" "Tonight," Draven repeated. "Before they have time to regroup." He looked at Selene. "You're certain about what you heard?" "Yes." "Then we use it." He turned to the generals. "Assemble the court, every noble house in the city, every merchant guild, every military commander. I want witnesses, hundreds of them, So many that nobody can claim this was done in shadows. The generals hesitated. Then Kellen nodded. "It'll be done," he said. They left to make preparations. Draven crossed to Selene, studying her face. "You just potentially saved this kingdom," he said quietly. "Or doomed it," Selene replied. "Depends on what Vaeric says." Draven's expression was grim. "Either way, we'll know tonight." The throne room had never held this many people. Nobles crowded the galleries. Merchants filled the side chambers. Soldiers lined every wall. Selene stood near the throne, watching the crowd with the servants' practiced invisibility. At the center of the room, Chancellor Vaeric Thorne stood in chains. He looked smaller than he had 3 days ago, thinner, but his eyes were still sharp, still calculating. Draven sat on the Iron Throne, and the weight of the crown seemed heavier than ever. "Vaeric Thorne," he said, his voice carrying across the massive chamber. "You stand accused of conspiracy to commit regicide, manipulation of the crown, and treason against the Iron Dominion. How do you answer these charges?" Vaeric met his eyes. "Guilty," he said clearly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vaeric raised his voice. "But let the record show that every action I took was in service to this kingdom. I manipulated a king who was destroying himself. I removed a ruler who'd become a liability. I maintained stability when chaos threatened to tear us apart." He looked directly at Draven. "You call it treason. I call it duty." Draven's expression didn't change. "Duty," he repeated. "Tell me, Chancellor, was it duty when you imprisoned an innocent woman to keep me isolated?" Vaeric's jaw tightened. "She was a variable that threatened the balance of power." "She was a person," Draven said. "And you treated her like a chess piece." "In games of power, everyone is a chess piece," Vaeric shot back, "kings included." The throne room went silent. Draven leaned forward. "Then let me ask you something," he said. "If everyone is a piece on the board, who's playing the game?" Vaeric smiled. "Whoever's smart enough to see the whole board," he said. Draven stood. "Then you made one critical mistake," he said. "What's that?" "You forgot that sometimes the pieces refuse to move." He descended the throne steps. "You built a system where power required keeping people broken, where stability meant manufactured suffering, where the only way to rule was to become the kind of monster who stopped seeing humans as human." He stopped in front of Vaeric. "But here's what you didn't account for," he said. "Some of us would rather burn the board than keep playing." Vaeric's expression shifted. Something close to fear flickered behind his eyes. "You're making a speech," he said, "but words don't change the reality of power." "You're right," Draven agreed. "Actions do." He turned to address the entire throne room. "Chancellor Vaeric Thorne is guilty of crimes that would normally result in execution," he said. "But execution is too easy, too clean. It turns him into a martyr." He looked back at Vaeric. "So instead you'll live," he said, "in exile. Stripped of title, wealth, and authority. You'll be sent to the farthest border territory with nothing but the clothes on your back, and you'll spend the rest of your life watching the kingdom you tried to control survive without you." Vaeric's face went pale. "You can't." "I just did," Draven said. He turned to the guards. "Remove him." As they dragged Vaeric toward the doors, the Chancellor's composure finally shattered. "You've doomed this kingdom," he shouted. "Without structure, without control, it'll tear itself apart. You'll see. You'll—" The doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice. The throne room erupted in chaos. Nobles argued, merchants whispered, soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Draven raised one hand, and silence fell. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "That I've just destroyed the stability that kept this empire functioning. That rebellion is inevitable now. That choosing compassion over control is weakness." He paused. "You might be right," he admitted. "This might be the choice that ends my reign, but I'd rather rule for one day as a man who valued human life than for 1,000 years as a monster who didn't." He looked across the crowd. "The old system is over," he said, "the one built on fear and exploitation. Starting tomorrow, we build something different, something that doesn't require breaking people to maintain order." Someone in the crowd shouted, "And if that fails, what then?" Draven's expression hardened. "Then I'll take responsibility," he said, "but I won't take it back." He returned to the throne and sat. "This court is dismissed." The crowd dispersed slowly, filling the corridors with arguments and speculation. Selene approached the throne as the last nobles filed out. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, she said, or the most foolish. Draven's eyes found hers. Probably both, he said. He stood and offered his hand. Walk with me. They left the throne room and climbed to the highest tower of Blackmere Citadel, the one that overlooked the entire capital. Below them, the city sprawled in all directions. Lights flickered in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. People lived their lives unaware that the empire had just fractured. Draven leaned against the tower railing. My father used to bring me here, he said. He'd point at the city and tell me that every light represented a life that depended on the throne, that the weight of all those lives was what made kings strong. He was quiet for a moment. But tonight I realized something, he continued. The weight doesn't make you strong. It crushes you until you stop seeing lights and start seeing numbers. He turned to look at Selene. You made me see lights again, he said. Individual people with individual stories, not just numbers on a ledger. Selene moved to stand beside him. What happens now? She asked. Draven's expression was complicated. Now we find out if a kingdom built on fear can survive being rebuilt on something else, he said. And if it can't, then we burn together. He reached for her hand, and somehow that didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like choice. The kind of choice that defined who you were when everything else got taken away. Below them, the city slept. Above them, stars burned in a sky that didn't care about empires or thrones or the desperate choices of kings trying to remember how to be human. And between earth and stars, two people stood holding on to each other like they were the only solid things left in a world determined to collapse. Because maybe they were. The city didn't burn immediately. That was the mistake Draven made. Thinking change could happen without fire. Thinking mercy would be interpreted as strength instead of weakness. Thinking the empire could survive being rebuilt by a king who'd spent 3 days dismantling every power structure that kept it standing. He should have known better. Power doesn't surrender. It regroups. The first sign came 4 days after Vaeric's exile. A messenger arrived at dawn with news from the Eastern Territories. 3 villages had declared independence from the Iron Dominion. They'd stopped paying tribute, burned the tax collector's outpost, raised banners that showed a broken crown. Draven stood in the war room staring at the map, and Selene watched his expression shift from disbelief to something colder. They think I'm weak, he said quietly. General Kellen stood across the table, scarred hands braced against wood. They think you're distracted, he corrected. You executed the Elder Circle's authority, exiled the Chancellor, changed the tribute system overnight. The territories are testing whether the new king has teeth. Draven's jaw tightened. Send a company east. No bloodshed unless they draw first. I want to negotiate. Your Majesty, Kellen said carefully, negotiation is seen as weakness, Draven finished. I know, but I'm not my father. I won't burn villages for asking questions. Kellen's expression suggested that was exactly the problem. He left to dispatch the company. Selene moved to stand beside Draven at the map. She'd learned to read the markers. Red meant rebellion. Yellow meant uncertain loyalty. Green meant stable. There was very little green left. This is happening because of me, she said. Draven didn't look at her. This is happening because the system was rotten, he said. Removing corruption just exposed how much of the structure was built on it. But if you'd sent me away, then I'd still be the monster they wanted me to be, Draven interrupted. And none of this would change. The Empire would keep grinding people into dust, and I'd keep signing the orders that made it happen. He finally looked at her. I chose this, he said. All of it. Don't take that away by blaming yourself. But the words sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than her. Over the next week, the situation deteriorated. 2 more territories declared independence. A noble house in the south refused to acknowledge Draven's authority. Merchants started hoarding supplies, betting on civil war. The military remained split, with entire battalions refusing orders from commanders loyal to the throne. Selene moved through the citadel, watching the cracks widen. She'd maintained her network of servants, but the information they brought grew darker each day. Whispers of assassination plots, plans to rescue Vaeric from exile, secret meetings between nobles who'd smiled at Draven's trial but were now sharpening knives behind closed doors. She reported everything to Draven, and watched him age years and days. The king who'd slept peacefully beside her 2 weeks ago now barely slept at all. He spent nights pacing the Western Wing, checking troop reports, drafting orders that tried to hold an empire together through diplomacy when everyone around him was preparing for war. Selene found him one night standing at the window, staring at nothing. "You need to rest," she said. "I need to fix this. You can't fix everything alone." Draven's laugh was bitter. "I'm the king," he said. "Fixing things alone is the job description." He turned to face her, and his eyes were haunted. "My father used to tell me that ruling meant making choices no one else could make," he said. "I thought he meant hard choices, strategic ones, but he meant the kind of choices that strip away everything human until only the crown remains." His hands clenched. "I'm starting to understand why he became what he became," he said. "Because every time I choose mercy, the Empire interprets it as weakness. Every time I try to change the system, another territory rebels. It's like the kingdom itself is rejecting the idea of being ruled by someone who sees people as more than numbers." Selene crossed to him. "Then maybe the kingdom needs to be rejected right back," she said. Draven looked at her. "You don't mean that, don't I?" "If the only way to rule is to become a monster, maybe the Empire doesn't deserve to exist. That's easy to say when you're not wearing the crown." The words came out harsher than he intended. Selene stepped back and something shifted in her expression. Not anger, something colder. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not wearing the crown. I'm just the servant girl who gave you a reason to take it off." She left before he could respond. Draven stood alone in the chamber, feeling the walls close in, and somewhere deep inside the wolf stirred, hungry. The breaking point came on the 10th day. Selene was in the kitchens gathering information when Nessa found her. The girl's face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "You need to leave," Nessa whispered. "Now." "What? Why?" "The guards are coming for you. Orders from General Kellen. They're saying you're a spy." Selene's blood turned to ice. "That's insane. I've been reporting to the king this entire time." Nessa grabbed her arm. "It doesn't matter. Half the court thinks you're manipulating him. They're calling you a traitor. You need to run." But Selene didn't run. She went to find Draven. She moved through corridors that suddenly felt hostile, servants avoiding her eyes, guards watching with expressions that had shifted from neutral to suspicious. She reached the war room and pushed through the doors without knocking. Inside, Draven stood surrounded by 6 generals. All of them turned to stare at her. General Kellen's hand moved to his sword. "Selene Vale," he said. "You're under arrest for espionage and conspiracy against the crown." Selene's eyes found Draven. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "What is this?" she asked. Draven's voice, when he spoke, was carefully controlled. "Evidence has surfaced suggesting you've been passing information to rebel territories," he said. "Communications found in servant quarters. Messages with details only someone inside the Citadel would know." Selene's mind raced. "That's impossible. I've been gathering information for you, or pretending to," Kellen interrupted, "while actually feeding intelligence to our enemies." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and tossed it on the table. "This was found in your belongings," he said. "A letter detailing troop movements, supply routes, weaknesses in our defenses." Selene stared at the paper. "I've never seen that before in my life." "Of course you haven't," Kellen said. "That's what every traitor says." "Draven," Selene said, looking directly at him, "you know this is wrong. You know I wouldn't—" "Do I?" Draven interrupted. His voice was cold. Stranger's voice. "You appeared in my life at the exact moment I was most vulnerable," he said. "You became the one person I trusted completely, the one person who could influence my decisions. And now the Empire is falling apart, territories are rebelling, and evidence suggests you've been feeding them information that makes rebellion possible." He took a step closer. "Tell me why I shouldn't believe you're exactly what they say you are." Selene felt the ground drop away. "Because you know me," she said. "I thought I did." The words hit like a physical blow. Selene looked around the room. 6 generals, all of them watching her with expressions ranging from suspicion to certainty of guilt. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup, and Draven was either part of it or too broken to see through it. "Who gave you that letter?" she asked Kellen. The general's expression didn't change. "A servant loyal to the crown," he said. "Which servant?" "That's classified." "Convenient." Kellen's hand tightened on his sword. Careful, girl. You're already facing execution. Don't make it worse. Selene turned back to Draven. If you believe this, she said quietly, then you've already lost. Not to them, to yourself. Draven's expression flickered, just for a second. Then it hardened again. Take her to the dungeons, he said. Guards moved forward. Selene didn't resist, just kept her eyes on Draven as chains were fastened around her wrists. You're making a mistake, she said. Draven turned away. That seems to be my specialty lately. They dragged her out. The dungeon felt different the second time, colder, darker, more final. Selene sat in the same cell where Draven had found her before and tried to understand what had just happened. The letter was fake, obviously fake. Someone had planted it to destroy the trust between her and the king. But who? And why had Draven believed it so easily? She replayed the scene in the war room, the way the generals had watched her, the way Kellen had spoken with absolute certainty, the way Draven had looked at her like she was a stranger. This wasn't just about destroying her, this was about destroying him. Because a king who'd gambled everything on trusting someone, only to be betrayed by them, would never trust again. He'd retreat back into isolation, back into the monster the Empire needed him to be. Selene pressed her forehead against cold stone. Someone had played them both perfectly. Hours passed, maybe days. Time stopped meaning anything in the dark. Then footsteps approached her cell. Selene looked up, expecting guards. Instead, she saw Nessa. The girl stood outside the bars, face twisted with guilt. I'm sorry, she whispered. Selene's blood went cold. You? Nessa's hands shook as she gripped the bars. They told me you were dangerous, she said, that you were manipulating the king, that if I didn't help them prove it, I'd be sent to the mines. Who told you that? Nessa's voice broke. General Kellen. He said I was protecting the kingdom. He gave me the letter and told me where to plant it. He said it was the only way to save the king from himself. Tears ran down her face.
I didn't know it would go this far, she sobbed. I thought they just wanted to separate you. I didn't know they'd arrest you. I didn't know. Save it, Selene said. Her voice was dead. Nessa flinched. I can help you escape, she said. I can steal keys. I can... You've helped enough. Selene turned away from the bars. Nessa stood there for a long moment, then fled. And Selene sat alone in the dark, understanding finally clicking into place. This wasn't about her. This was about breaking Draven completely, and she'd been the weapon they used to do it. 2 days later, they came for her trial. Not a real trial, a performance. They dragged Selene into the throne room in chains. The galleries were packed with nobles wearing expressions of vindicated satisfaction. At the center of it all, Draven sat on the Iron Throne looking like he hadn't slept since her arrest. General Kellen stood as prosecutor. He presented the evidence with clinical precision. The letter. Testimony from servants claiming they'd seen Selene in places she shouldn't have been. Reports of coded messages sent from the Citadel to rebel territories that matched intelligence Selene had access to. It was all lies. But it was all believable, because the best lies are built on frameworks of truth, twisted just enough to serve a different narrative. When Kellen finished, he turned to Draven. The evidence is overwhelming, Your Majesty. This woman betrayed your trust, compromised our security, and directly contributed to the rebellion threatening the kingdom. There is only one appropriate sentence. The throne room went silent. Draven stared at Selene with eyes that looked carved from stone. Do you have anything to say in your defense? He asked. Selene met his gaze. Would it matter if I did? Draven's expression didn't change. Try me. Selene took a breath. I didn't betray you, she said. I couldn't, because the person you became when you were with me was the first real thing I'd seen in this place. Everything else was performance, survival. But you were real. She paused. Someone wanted to destroy that, she continued. Someone needed you broken and isolated because a king who remembers how to be human is dangerous to people who've built power on keeping him inhuman. She looked at Kellen, and they used me to do it because they knew you'd believe it. Because trust is the easiest thing in the world to weaponize. The throne room was absolutely silent. Draven stood slowly. He walked down the throne steps and stopped in front of her. For a long moment, he just studied her face. Then he said, I want to believe you.
The words were quiet, almost lost in the massive chamber. But I've been lied to by everyone in this room at some point, he continued. My father lied about the stability of the kingdom. Vaeric lied about trying to help me. The nobles lied about their loyalty. Why should you be different? Selene held his gaze. Because I never asked you to be a king, she said. I only ever saw you as a man, and that's the thing they can't fake. Draven's jaw tightened. He turned to address the court. The evidence suggests guilt, he said. The testimony supports conviction. By all logic, I should order execution. He paused. But logic is what got us here. Logic said I needed to be isolated to stay stable. Logic said fear was the only way to rule. Logic said changing the system would destroy the kingdom. He looked back at Selene. Maybe it's time to stop trusting logic. General Kaelor stepped forward. Your Majesty, you can't be serious. I'm deadly serious, Draven interrupted. This trial is a performance. The evidence is manufactured, and every person in this room knows it. Gasps rippled through the galleries. Kellen's face went pale. That's a serious accusation. Is it? Draven's voice cut like a blade. Then explain to me how a servant with no connections, no resources, and no motive managed to coordinate with rebel territories while under constant surveillance. Explain how letters appeared in her quarters despite her never being seen writing them. Explain how the one person who had the most to lose from rebellion is supposedly its architect. He took a step toward Kellen. Or explain why you're the one who found the evidence. You're the one who pushed for arrest. You're the one who stands to benefit most from removing the person who kept me from becoming the monster you need me to be. The throne room erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted. Guards shifted positions. Kellen's hand moved to his sword. Draven's voice cut through the noise. General Kellen, you're under arrest for conspiracy, falsifying evidence, and treason. Kellen's face twisted with rage. You're destroying yourself over a servant, he shouted. The kingdom needs you strong. Ruthless. You're throwing away everything because you're too weak to see she's poison. Draven's expression was cold as winter. No, he said. I'm throwing away everything because I finally understand what strength actually means. He gestured to the guards. Take him. But Kellen didn't go quietly. He drew his sword in one fluid motion and lunged at Draven. The blade caught light as it arced toward the king's throat. Time fractured. Draven moved on instinct, twisting away from the strike. His hand shot out and caught Kellen's wrist, wrenching it with force that made bones crack. The sword clattered to the floor. But Kellen wasn't finished. He slammed his other fist into Draven's ribs, once, twice, then drove his knee toward the king's stomach. Draven blocked, but the impact drove him backward. The two men crashed into the base of the throne, trading brutal strikes that echoed through the chamber. Blood sprayed. Someone in the galleries screamed. Guards rushed forward but couldn't get a clear opening without risking hitting the king. Kellen fought like a man with nothing left to lose, because he didn't. Draven had just destroyed his conspiracy, exposed his manipulation. Kellen's choices were execution or winning this fight right now. He chose the fight. His hands found Draven's throat and squeezed. The king's face started turning red. His hands clawed at Kellen's grip. The wolf inside him surged forward, gold bleeding into his eyes, but Kellen's position was perfect. Too close for shifting, too tight for leverage. Draven was dying, and Selene was still in chains. She didn't think, just acted. She slammed her body into the guard nearest her, using her chained wrist to hook his neck. He went down hard. She grabbed his fallen blade with bound hands and ran, straight at Kellen. The general saw her coming. His eyes widened. He released Draven's throat and turned, but he was too slow. Selene drove the blade into his side with every ounce of strength she had. Kellen gasped, staggered backward. His hands found the wound, blood pouring between his fingers. Draven surged forward and slammed his fist into Kellen's face. The general went down and didn't get up. The throne room was silent except for Draven's ragged breathing. He stood over Kellen's body, chest heaving, blood covering his hands. Then he turned to Selene. She stood holding the blade, chains still locked around her wrists, breathing hard. Their eyes met, and Draven crossed to her in 3 strides. He pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressing her close like he was afraid she'd disappear. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have—"
Selene dropped the blade and wrapped her chained arms around him. "You did trust me," she said. "You came back." They stood like that for a long time, until reality crashed back in.
Draven pulled away and turned to face the court. Every noble, every guard, every merchant who'd witnessed the fight. His voice, when he spoke, carried absolute authority. General Kellen conspired to frame an innocent woman and assassinate the king, he said. Anyone who supported him will be identified and held accountable. Anyone who knew and said nothing will be exiled. And anyone who thinks this is the moment to test my resolve will learn exactly what happens when you push an alpha too far. His eyes blazed gold. The old system is over, he said. The one built on manipulation and control. We're building something different now, and if you can't adapt, there's the door. Nobody moved. Draven gestured to the guards. Release her, now. They rushed forward to unlock Selene's chains. The metal fell away and she rubbed her wrists, watching Draven address the court with a presence that was different from before. Not the controlled monster Vaeric had cultivated, not the struggling man trying to change systems that resisted change. This was something else. A king who'd walked through betrayal and come out the other side knowing exactly what he was willing to destroy to protect what mattered. The trial ended. Nobles scattered to their estates, suddenly very aware that loyalty had become non-negotiable. Draven and Selene returned to the western wing. Neither spoke until the door closed behind them. Then Draven said, "I thought you'd betrayed me." His voice was raw. Selene turned to face him. "I know. I should have trusted you immediately." "You were drowning," Selene said. "People who are drowning can't tell the difference between a hand reaching to help and one reaching to push them under." Draven's hands clenched. "Kellen almost succeeded," he said. "If you hadn't been in that room, if you hadn't moved when you did." "But I was. And I did. Why?" Selene crossed to him. "Because you're worth saving," she said simply, "even when you don't believe it yourself." Draven pulled her close again, and this time the embrace was different, desperate, like he was holding on to the last solid thing in a world that kept trying to collapse. "I can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "Every time I try to change something, it breaks worse. Every time I show mercy, it's interpreted as weakness. Every time I trust someone, they use it to hurt me." His voice cracked. "Maybe they're right. Maybe the only way to rule is to become the monster." Selene pulled back just enough to look at him. "Then don't rule," she said. "What? If being king means becoming something that destroys you, then stop being king." Draven stared at her. "You can't mean that." "Why not? Walk away. Let them tear themselves apart fighting over the crown. We'll leave. Find somewhere the Empire hasn't reached. Build something that doesn't require bleeding to maintain." His expression was complicated. "You'd do that? Just leave? I'd do anything to stop watching you die slowly under that crown." Draven was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I leave, everything I tried to change dies with me," he said. "The tribute system goes back. The corruption returns. People like you end up back in chains." He touched her face. "I started this," he said. "I have to finish it, even if it kills you." Draven's smile was bitter. "Especially then," he said, "because at least I'll die as something more than the monster they wanted me to become." Selene wanted to argue, wanted to scream that his life mattered more than an empire built on suffering. But she understood, because some people couldn't walk away from fights even when walking away was the smart choice. They were too busy being what the world needed them to be to save themselves. 3 days later, news arrived that changed everything. A massive army had assembled on the eastern border. Not rebels, not scattered resistance. A coordinated force of 8 territories backed by noble houses, supplied by merchants, and led by someone Draven thought had been safely exiled. Chancellor Vaeric Thorne had returned, and he'd brought war with him. Draven stood in the war room staring at scout reports that painted an impossible picture. Vaeric had spent his exile doing exactly what he'd always done, building networks, making deals, convincing people that the only way to save the empire was to remove the king who was destroying it from within. He'd turned exile into recruitment, and now he was coming home with enough force to take the throne by strength, since manipulation had failed. General Tomas, one of the few commanders still loyal to Draven, pointed at the map. "They'll reach the capital in 5 days," he said. "Maybe less. We have 3 battalions we can fully trust, maybe 2 more that are uncertain, against 8 territories worth of soldiers. He looked at Draven. We're outnumbered 4-1, Your Majesty. Draven's expression was carved from stone. Can we hold the citadel? For a while, Tomas said. But sieges are won by supplies and morale. They have both. We're running low on the first and bleeding the second, so we can't fight them. We can die fighting them, Tomas corrected, which isn't the same thing. The room fell silent. Selene stood near the window watching Draven process information that added up to one conclusion. He'd lost, not because he'd been weak, because he'd tried to change a system that would rather burn than transform. Draven straightened slowly. Send word to Vaeric, he said. I'll negotiate terms of surrender. Tomas's eyes widened. Your Majesty! I won't watch this city burn in a siege, Draven said, and I won't sacrifice thousands of lives trying to hold a throne I'm clearly not meant to keep. His voice was steady. Final. Set up a meeting. Neutral ground. 3 days from now. He looked at Selene. And prepare a horse. She leaves tonight. Selene's stomach dropped. What? You're not staying for this, Draven said. Yes, I am. No, you're not. When I meet Vaeric, one of his conditions will be your execution. I'm not giving him that. Selene crossed to him. Then don't surrender. We just established we can't win. So we run, she said. Together. Right now. Leave the throne to whoever wants it badly enough to bleed for it. Draven's expression was pained. We've had this conversation. Then have it again, Selene said. Keep having it until you understand that your life matters more than a crown nobody asked you to carry. Draven took her hands. I don't matter, he said gently. Not anymore. What matters is making sure the people who tried to change things with me don't get executed for it. What matters is ending this war before it burns territories that had nothing to do with my choices. His grip tightened. And what matters is making sure you survive. Because you made me remember what it felt like to be human. And I need to know that humanity still exists somewhere, even after I'm gone. Tears burned in Selene's eyes. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice, Draven said. I'm ordering you as king. Then I'm disobeying you as the woman who loves you. The words hung in the air between them. Draven's eyes closed. Don't, he said quietly. Don't what? Make this harder than it already is. Selene pulled her hands free. Good, she said. I hope it's impossible. I hope it tears you apart. Because maybe then you'll understand that dying for principle is just another way of running. She turned toward the door. Draven's voice stopped her. If you stay, he said, they'll execute you, publicly, painfully, as an example to anyone who thinks they can manipulate kings. Selene looked back at him. Then we better make sure we don't lose. And she left before he could argue. The next 2 days were chaos. Draven prepared for negotiations while secretly preparing for war. He met with loyal commanders, reinforced citadel defenses, and sent quiet messages to territories that hadn't yet chosen sides. Selene moved through her own preparations. She contacted every servant in her network, every stable hand, kitchen worker, and chamber cleaner who'd chosen to trust a king trying to be better. She gave them a choice. Leave now and save yourselves. Or stay and fight for a kingdom that might actually be worth fighting for. Most stayed, because people don't follow crowns. They follow the person wearing it. On the 3rd day, Draven rode out to meet Vaeric. Selene watched from the citadel walls as the king's small escort disappeared over the eastern ridge toward neutral ground where terms of surrender would be discussed. She waited an hour, then she followed, because she'd realized something during the sleepless nights since Kellen's attack. Draven was still playing by rules that no longer existed. He thought he could negotiate, compromise, find a solution that minimized bloodshed. But Vaeric didn't want compromise. He wanted absolute control. And the only way to stop someone who wanted absolute control was to destroy the possibility of it entirely. Selene reached the meeting ground as sun touched the horizon. It was a clearing between 2 hills, chosen because neither side could hide reinforcements. Draven stood with 3 guards facing Vaeric who'd brought 20 soldiers. Not great odds. Selene dismounted and walked forward before anyone could stop her. Draven turned and his expression shifted from shock to fury. I told you to leave, and I told you I wasn't going to. Vaeric's laugh cut through the tension. How touching, he said. The king and his pet servant, still choosing each other over the kingdom. He looked past them to the soldiers. Seize them both! 20 men moved forward. Draven's eyes flared gold. The wolf surged up, and his guards drew weapons. But before violence could erupt, Selene raised her voice. Wait! Everyone stopped. She looked at Vaeric. You want the throne? She said. Take it. Draven's head snapped toward her. What are you doing? Saving your life, Selene said without looking at him. Because you're too stubborn to save yourself. She addressed Vaeric directly. The king will abdicate, she said, publicly. He'll swear loyalty to your rule. He'll tell the territories to stand down. You get the empire without a war. He gets to live. Vaeric studied her with calculating eyes. And you? He asked. I get executed, Selene said. That's the price. I know. No, Draven said. The word was final. Absolute. Selene finally turned to face him. You were willing to die to end this war, she said. So am I. That's different. Why? Because you're the king and I'm just a servant? Because I chose this. You didn't. I choose it now. She looked back at Vaeric. Do we have a deal? The Chancellor's smile was cold as winter. Almost, he said. But I need one more thing. What? He gestured to Draven. The king doesn't just abdicate, Vaeric said. He kneels, in front of his soldiers, in front of my forces, and admits that his attempt to change the empire was a mistake that nearly destroyed it. He leaned forward. I need him broken, he said, completely, so thoroughly that nobody ever tries to follow his example again. The clearing went silent. Selene looked at Draven and saw the exact moment he understood what choice he was actually being given. Save her life by destroying everything he'd tried to become, or let her die for principles that had already cost him the throne. Draven's hands slowly uncurled from fists, and he knelt. The sound of a king kneeling isn't loud. It's the silence that follows that destroys worlds. Draven's knees hit dirt in the clearing between two hills, and every soldier watching understood what they were witnessing. Not surrender. Something worse. The dismantling of a man who tried to be more than the empire allowed him to be, forced to admit that trying had been the mistake. Vaeric stood above him, victory carved into every line of his face. Say it, the Chancellor commanded. Draven's jaw was locked so tight Selene could see muscles straining in his neck. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground. The wolf inside him was screaming. She could see it in the way his hands trembled, fighting every alpha instinct that demanded he rise and tear throats until the clearing ran red. But he didn't move, because the woman he'd chosen over an empire was standing 10 feet away with 20 soldiers ready to cut her down the moment he refused. I was wrong, Draven said. His voice was rough, stripped raw. Vaeric smiled, louder. So my soldiers can hear what happens to kings who forget their place. Draven's hands curled into fists in the dirt. I was wrong to try to change the tribute system, he said, voice carrying across the clearing now. I was wrong to dismantle the Elder Circle. I was wrong to believe the Empire could be ruled through anything except strength and fear. Each word looked like it cost him blood. Vaeric circled him slowly, playing to the audience of soldiers who'd followed him here. And the servant girl? He asked. The one you nearly destroyed a kingdom for? Draven's eyes finally lifted. Found Selene's. She saw everything in that look. Rage, desperation, love twisted into something that hurt to witness. A mistake, Draven said. The words physically struck her. She knew they were lies, knew he was performing to save her life. But hearing them spoken aloud in that dead voice carved something away that would never fully heal. Vaeric's smile widened. Good, he said. Then we have an agreement. You abdicate publicly tomorrow, swear loyalty to my rule, and the girl lives, exiled, stripped of everything, but breathing. He gestured to his soldiers. Take him back to the Citadel, under guard. I want him watched every moment until the ceremony. 4 men moved forward to seize Draven, but as they reached for him, something shifted in the air, subtle, almost imperceptible. Selene felt it first, a pressure change that made her skin prickle, the way the atmosphere shifted before lightning struck. Draven's head tilted slightly, and he smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Selene had ever seen. Not the broken smile of a defeated king, the smile of a predator who'd been waiting for prey to step close enough. "You made one mistake," Draven said quietly. Vaeric frowned. "What?" "You assumed I came here to negotiate. Then everything happened at once." Draven moved with speed that defied human physics. His hand shot out and grabbed the nearest soldier's throat, crushing windpipe before the man could scream. He ripped the sword from the dying man's grip and drove it through the second soldier's chest in one fluid motion. The clearing erupted. Vaeric's soldiers rushed forward, but Draven was already moving, not like a man fighting, like something ancient and unstoppable that had finally been given permission to stop pretending. The wolf wasn't just awake, it was in control. But this time it wasn't mindless rage. It was calculated violence executed with surgical precision by an alpha who'd spent a year learning to merge man and beast into something more dangerous than either alone. He killed 3 men in the time it took their companions to draw weapons, moved through them like they were standing still. Blood sprayed across dirt already stained from previous battles. Steel rang against steel in exchanges that lasted seconds before Draven's blade found flesh. Selene stood frozen, watching the most feared king in the Empire become the monster everyone had always believed he was. Except this monster was choosing who to kill. He cut through soldiers who blocked his path but avoided the ones who retreated. Disarmed men who fought but didn't finish those who surrendered. This wasn't mindless slaughter. This was targeted elimination of a threat that had backed him into a corner where the only choice left was overwhelming violence or total surrender. And Draven had spent 3 days pretending to choose surrender while actually preparing for this. Vaeric's remaining soldiers scattered. Some ran. Others threw down weapons. Within 30 seconds, 12 men were dead or dying, and the rest had retreated beyond blade range. Draven stood in the center of the clearing, covered in blood that wasn't his, breathing steady, sword still raised. His eyes found Vaeric. The Chancellor had backed toward his horse, face pale, hand on his own blade, but clearly reconsidering drawing it.
"You're insane," Vaeric said. "You've just murdered soldiers under flag of negotiation. Every territory will declare war. You've destroyed yourself." Draven started walking toward him.
"No,"
he said. "I've just stopped playing by rules that only applied to me." He gestured at the bodies. "You wanted me broken, controllable, a king who'd learned his place. But here's what you never understood about alphas. We don't break, we burn. And when you finally push us past the edge where rules matter, we become the nightmare you've been trying to prevent." He was 10 feet from Vaeric now. 5. The Chancellor drew his sword with shaking hands. "Stay back." "Or what?" Draven asked. "You'll execute the woman I love? You were already going to do that. You'll turn the territories against me? They're already rebelling. You'll paint me as a monster? They've been calling me that since I was born." He stopped just outside sword range. "You spent years trying to control me by making me afraid of what I might become," he said. "So congratulations. You finally succeeded in showing me exactly what I'm capable of when I stop being afraid." Vaeric lunged. His blade was fast, professional, the strike of someone who'd spent decades training with weapons. Draven caught his wrist mid-strike and twisted. Bones cracked. Vaeric screamed, the sword fell. Draven drove his knee into the Chancellor's stomach, then slammed him to the ground. He planted his boot on Vaeric's chest and raised his blade. "Wait!" Vaeric gasped. "Please, we can still negotiate. I can call off the armies. We can—" Draven's expression was carved from stone. "You were right about one thing," he said. "A crown is a wound, and the moment a ruler fears bleeding, the kingdom dies." He looked down at the man who'd orchestrated his father's murder, manipulated him for years, tried to destroy the one person who made him feel human. "I'm done fearing the wound," Draven said. The blade fell. Vaeric's eyes went wide, then empty. Silence crashed over the clearing like a physical force. Draven stood over the body of the man who'd controlled the Iron Dominion from the shadows for 2 decades. Blood dripped from his sword, his chest heaved with exertion. Then he turned to Selene. She stood exactly where she'd been when the violence started, hands still bound in ceremonial chains Vaeric had insisted she wear as part of the surrender terms. Draven crossed to her in 3 strides. His hands found the chains and ripped them apart like they were made of paper. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough. "No. Did any of them touch you?"
No. Good. He pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressing her close. His heartbeat was thunder against her ear. His body was furnace hot from the shift that had happened when the wolf took control. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair. "I'm sorry for what I said, for making you think even for a second that you were a mistake. You're the only thing I've ever done right." Selene's hands found his face, forcing him to look at her. "I know," she said. "I knew the entire time." His eyes searched hers. "How?" "Because I've watched you lie to nobles for weeks," she said. "You're terrible at it. Your jaw does this thing where it locks when you're forcing words you don't mean." Despite everything, Draven almost smiled. Then the moment shattered. Hoofbeats echoed from both hills. Soldiers appeared on the ridges. Hundreds of them. Vaeric's army had been waiting just out of sight, and the sounds of battle had drawn them forward. Draven and Selene found themselves surrounded by forces that outnumbered them 50-1. A commander rode forward, older man with scars that told stories of decades spent in combat. He looked at Vaeric's body, at the slaughtered soldiers, at the king and servant standing in the center of carnage. "Chancellor Vaeric promised us reform," the commander said. "Promised the territories would get fair representation. Better tribute terms? A voice in governance." He paused. "But I've been fighting wars for 30 years, and I know a manipulator when I see one." Vaeric wasn't offering reform. He was offering a different kind of control. His eyes found Draven. "So before we decide whether to finish this, I want to hear from you. The king who supposedly started this war by trying to change things. Tell me why your version of the empire is worth more bodies." Draven stepped forward. Selene tried to hold him back, but he gently moved her hand aside. He walked to the center of the clearing, alone, facing an army. When he spoke, his voice carried across the hills with the authority of someone who'd finally stopped questioning whether he had the right to lead. "I can't promise you reform will work," he said. "I can't promise changing the system won't break things worse before they get better. I can't even promise I'm the right person to lead that change." He paused. "But I can promise you this. I will never again rule by making you afraid of me. I will never again maintain stability by grinding your settlements into dust. And I will never again allow men like Vaeric to whisper in my ear that cruelty is the same thing as strength." He gestured at the bodies. "I killed these men because they were going to execute an innocent woman to prove a point about control," he said. "I killed their commander because he murdered my father and spent years trying to turn me into a weapon he could aim at anyone who questioned his authority." His hands spread. "Maybe that makes me a monster. Maybe that proves I'm exactly what you've been taught to fear. But if you're going to kill me, do it because you believe the empire is better off with someone else leading, not because Vaeric convinced you I'm too dangerous to control." The hills went silent. Soldiers looked at each other, at their commanders, at the king standing alone offering them a choice instead of a command. The scarred commander dismounted. He walked to the center of the clearing and stopped in front of Draven. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then the commander knelt. One by one, soldiers on the hills followed. Not all of them. Maybe half. But enough that the ones still standing realized they were suddenly outnumbered. The commander looked up at Draven. "We'll follow you," he said. "Not because we believe you'll succeed, but because at least you're honest about not knowing if you will." Draven's expression was complicated. He offered his hand and pulled the commander to his feet. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the commander said. "And these are the 3rd and 7th Battalions. We were loyal to Vaeric because he promised us things that made sense. But dead men don't keep promises." He glanced at Vaeric's body. "So now we're loyal to you. At least until you prove you're as bad as the system you're trying to replace." Draven nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He turned to address the soldiers who'd knelt. "Anyone who wants to leave can leave," he said. "No punishment, no judgment. I won't hold you to loyalty you didn't freely choose." A few men stood and walked away. Most stayed. Draven looked at Marcus. How many territories were backing Vaeric's rebellion? 8, Marcus said. But 4 of them only joined because they thought he'd win. Now that he's dead, they'll either fold or wait to see what happens next. And the other 4? Those are true believers, Marcus said. They think the Empire needs to be torn down completely and rebuilt from scratch. They won't surrender just because Vaeric's gone. Draven's jaw tightened. Then we need to move fast, before they regroup and choose a new leader. He turned back toward Selene. She'd been watching the entire exchange with an expression that suggested she was recalculating everything she thought she understood about how power actually worked. Draven reached her and took her hand. "We're not done yet," he said quietly. "I know. This gets worse before it gets better. I know that too." "And you're still staying?" Selene squeezed his hand. "Try to make me leave." Something that might have been a smile crossed Draven's face. Then he turned back to Marcus and the assembled forces. "We ride for the Citadel," he said. "Gather everyone still loyal, every soldier, every servant, every person who believes change is possible." "What about the territories still in rebellion?" Marcus asked. "We give them one chance to surrender," Draven said. "After that, we end this the way it should have ended from the beginning. How's that?" "By proving that the wolf everyone fears answers to the man," Draven said. "Not the other way around." The army moved as one entity. Soldiers who'd been ready to kill each other an hour ago now rode together toward a citadel that had become the last stronghold of a king trying to change an empire from the inside out. Selene rode beside Draven at the front. "You're going to war," she said. "I've been at war since I put on the crown," Draven replied. "I'm just finally fighting the right enemy." "Which is?" "The system that says rulers have to be monsters to survive." Selene was quiet for a moment. "What if you can't change it?" "Then at least I'll die trying," Draven said. "That's more than most kings can say." They reached Blackmere as night fell. The citadel loomed against crimson sky like a monument to everything brutal about the empire. But this time, when Draven rode through the gates, he did it with an army at his back and a purpose that went beyond simple survival. The throne room had been transformed into a war council. Maps covered every surface. Markers showed territory positions. Scouts brought constant updates about rebel movements. General Tomas met them at the entrance. "Your Majesty," he said, "we received word an hour ago. The 4 territories still in rebellion have united under a single banner. They're marching on the capital. How long do we have?" 3 days. Maybe 4. Draven studied the maps. "How many soldiers?" 12,000, Tomas said, "against our 3,000. The room went silent. Marcus stepped forward. "We need to retreat," he said. "Fortify the citadel. Make them pay for every inch in a siege." Draven shook his head. "Sieges favor the attacker when they outnumber you 4-1, he said. "They'll starve us out or breach the walls through attrition." "Then what do you suggest?" Tomas asked. Draven's finger traced a path on the map. "Here," he said, pointing to a narrow valley 3 miles east of the capital. "The Wolf's Tooth Pass." "It's a bottleneck," Marcus said. "They'll see the trap." "They'll see caution," Draven corrected, "and caution is what you show when you're afraid of losing." He looked up at the assembled commanders. "We position our forces here," he said. "Make them think we're trying to defend a position. When they commit to the pass, we collapse the flanks and turn their numbers against them." "That's suicide," Tomas said. "If the flanks don't hold—" "They'll hold," Draven interrupted, "because I'll be leading one of them." The room erupted in protests. "Your Majesty, you can't—" "The king doesn't belong on the front. If you die, the entire strategy—" Draven's voice cut through the chaos. "I've spent a year asking soldiers to die for changes I believe in," he said. "I won't do it from a throne room anymore. If this is where the Empire's future gets decided, then I'll be standing on the line that decides it." He looked around the room. "Anyone who wants to argue can do it while we march. But the strategy stands." Commanders exchanged glances. Then Marcus nodded. "I'll take the other flank," he said. Tomas sighed. "Then I'll hold the center," he said, "and pray we all live long enough to regret this." Plans were made, soldiers were positioned, supply lines were established. Selene watched from the edges of the war council, understanding that the man she'd watched sleep peacefully beside her a month ago was now planning a battle that would determine whether an empire survived or collapsed. Later that night, she found him on the citadel walls. Draven stood looking out at the city, armor already strapped on, sword resting against his hip. He looked exhausted and alert at the same time, the way people looked when they'd passed beyond tiredness into pure will. "You should be resting," Selene said. "So should you." She moved to stand beside him. They were quiet for a long time. Then Draven said, "If this goes wrong—" "It won't. If it does," he continued, "I need you to take the horse I've prepared in the western stable. Ride south. There's a settlement 3 days from here that doesn't answer to the Dominion." "They'll take you in." Selene looked at him. You're planning your death. I'm planning for reality, Draven said. 12,000 soldiers against 3,000 doesn't end well in most stories. Then we better make sure this isn't most stories. Draven's expression was complicated. I don't regret it, he said suddenly. Any of it. Choosing you over the kingdom, starting this war, burning down systems that needed to burn. Even if tomorrow ends with my head on a spike, I don't regret finally becoming something more than what they tried to make me. Selene took his hand. You were always more, she said. You just needed someone to remind you. They stood like that until dawn broke over the citadel. Then Draven kissed her once, fierce and desperate, like he was memorizing what she tasted like in case it was the last time, and he marched to war. The Wolf's Tooth Pass looked like a graveyard waiting for bodies. Steep cliffs rose on both sides, creating a natural choke point that turned armies into compressed masses of vulnerable targets. Draven had positioned his forces exactly where the map suggested, center troops visible, flanks hidden in cliff positions above. Now they waited. Selene had refused to stay at the citadel. She'd ridden with the supply train and positioned herself on a ridge where she could see the entire pass. Draven had been furious, then resigned, then grateful in a way he didn't have words for. Some people needed to witness what they were fighting for. She was his witness. The rebel army appeared on the horizon as noon sun turned the world bronze. 12,000 soldiers marching under banners that proclaimed liberation from tyranny. They looked organized, confident, like an unstoppable force that had already won. They entered the pass without hesitation. Draven watched from his position on the northern flank, counting soldiers, calculating timing. Beside him, 50 men waited in absolute silence. He'd handpicked them. Veterans who'd survived decades of warfare, men who understood that sometimes battles were won in the seconds before violence erupted, when positioning and patience mattered more than strength. The rebel army pushed deeper into the pass. 3,000 soldiers, 6,000, 9,000. Almost the entire force committed to the bottleneck. Draven raised his hand. Every man on both flanks tensed. 12,000 soldiers now packed into a space designed for half that number. Draven's hand dropped, and hell came to Wolf's Tooth Pass. Rocks tumbled from cliff positions, triggering avalanches that crashed into the tightly packed rebel forces. Archers fired from elevated positions, arrows falling like deadly rain. Soldiers on the flanks poured down cliff paths, hitting the compressed enemy forces from angles they couldn't defend. The trap worked perfectly, for exactly 90 seconds. Then the rebel commanders did what good commanders always did. They adapted. Orders were shouted. The rebel army split into defensive formations. Shields came up. Pike walls formed. What had been chaos suddenly crystallized into organized resistance. And the numerical advantage that Draven had tried to negate with strategy reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. Draven's northern flank slammed into rebel forces 3 times their size. The impact was thunder made flesh. Steel met steel. Men screamed. Blood turned dirt to mud. Draven fought like something possessed, his sword a silver arc that cut through anyone stupid enough to get close. The wolf was fully present now, merging with the man to create something that moved with inhuman speed but struck with calculated precision. He killed 10 men in the first minute, 20 in the second, but for every rebel who fell, 2 more pushed forward. The northern flank started to buckle. Draven saw it happening in real time, his line bending under pressure, men falling. The trap that was supposed to destroy the rebel army instead becoming a slaughter of his own forces. He roared orders, trying to reinforce weak points. But there weren't enough soldiers, weren't enough weapons, weren't enough hours in the day to hold back an army that wanted vengeance for years of oppression. The line broke. Rebels poured through the gap like water through a cracked dam. Draven found himself surrounded, fighting in all directions at once. His armor took hits that would have killed unprotected men. His sword arm burned from constant motion. Blood covered him so completely he couldn't tell what was his and what wasn't. This was the end. He knew it, could feel it in the way his muscles were starting to fail, in the way rebels were pressing closer with every exchange, in the way the battlefield was tilting toward inevitable defeat. Then a horn sounded from the southern ridge. Not a retreat horn, a charge. Draven's head snapped up. On the ridge where the supply train had been positioned, hundreds of figures appeared. Not soldiers, servants, stable hands, kitchen workers, debt laborers from every settlement within 3 days' ride.
And leading them was Selene Vale with a cavalry banner raised above her head. She'd done it. While Draven had been planning military strategy, she'd been sending messages to every person the Empire had ground under its boot, every servant who'd been treated as property, every debtor who'd been chained for failing to pay impossible tribute. She'd given them a choice. Watch the king who tried to change things die defending an empire that would go back to bleeding them dry. Or fight. They'd chosen to fight. The makeshift army crashed into the rebel flank with ferocity born from years of suppressed rage. They weren't trained soldiers, weren't disciplined fighters, but they had numbers, and they had fury, and they had a leader who'd shown them that change was possible if you were willing to bleed for it. The battle became chaos. Organized rebel lines collapsed under assault from directions they hadn't prepared for. Draven's northern flank regrouped and pressed forward. Marcus's southern flank broke through rebel defenses and drove toward the center. And in the middle of everything, Selene fought with a sword she'd probably never held before that day, defending a king who'd burned an empire to keep her alive. The tide turned. Not quickly, not cleanly, but slowly, brutally, the rebel army began to collapse under pressure from forces they'd underestimated. By the time sun touched the western horizon, the battle was over. Bodies covered Wolf's Tooth Pass like fallen leaves. Rebels who still could run were running. Draven's forces were too exhausted to pursue. The king stood in the center of carnage, breathing hard, looking for one specific person among the thousands of wounded and dying. He found her. Selene sat against a rock, blood covering her arm, expression dazed. Draven crossed the battlefield and dropped to his knees in front of her. His hands found her face, checking for serious wounds. "Are you hurt?" Selene laughed. It came out broken. "I have no idea," she said. "Everything hurts, or nothing does. I can't tell anymore." Draven pulled her against him. "You're insane," he said into her hair. "You could have died. So could you." "That's different. Why?" "Because you're the king?" Selene pulled back to look at him. "I did exactly what you would have done," she said. "I found people who needed something to fight for, and I gave it to them." Her bloody hand touched his face. "You didn't save the Empire today," she said. "We did. All of us. Together." And Draven finally understood what he'd been too afraid to see. Power didn't come from crowns. It came from people choosing to follow you because you'd proven you'd bleed beside them instead of behind them. But victory carried its own cost. 3 days later, Draven stood in a throne room that smelled like death and medicine. Casualty reports covered his desk. 2,000 dead, another 1,000 wounded. Entire villages burned during the rebel advance. Supply chains destroyed. Territory governance collapsed. The Empire had survived, but barely. And there was still one threat left. The 4 territories that had rebelled weren't gone. They'd retreated, regrouped, were likely planning another assault. General Thomas entered the throne room carrying a sealed message. Draven opened it, read it once. Then again, slower, making sure he understood. His expression went carefully neutral. Selene, who'd been standing near the window with her arm bandaged, moved closer. "What is it?" "A proposal," Draven said. "From the rebel territories." "For what?" Draven's jaw tightened. "They'll recognize my authority and end the rebellion," he said. "On one condition." "What condition?" "I marry a representative from their coalition," Draven said. "Create a political alliance that gives them voice in governance without requiring military occupation." The throne room went silent. Selene's expression didn't change. "That makes sense," she said quietly. "Politically." "Selene, it gives you peace without more bloodshed," she continued. "Legitimizes the changes you're trying to make. Probably saves thousands of lives." She looked at him. "You should do it." Draven's hands crushed the message. "No, you don't have a choice. I always have a choice." "Not this time," Selene said. "Not if you want to be the king who saves the Empire instead of the one who tears it apart over personal feelings." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. "This is what being human costs," she said. "Sometimes you have to choose between the person you love and the kingdom that needs you." She crossed to him. "And you've spent the last month teaching me that the kingdom matters more." Draven looked at the woman who'd walked into his life as a servant and left it as the only person who'd ever made him want to be better than the crown demanded. "I can't," he said.
You have to. She touched his face one last time. 3 weeks, she said. That's how long you have to decide before they withdraw the offer. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Draven's voice stopped her. If I do this, you're not disappearing into exile. Selene looked back. What else is there? You stay, Draven said. As an advisor. As someone who reminds me what I'm fighting for when the crown starts grinding away the parts that still feel human. That's not how political marriages work. I don't care how they work, Draven said. I care that you're here. Selene's expression cracked. That's not fair. No, Draven agreed. But nothing about this is fair. So if I have to destroy myself by marrying someone I don't love to save an empire, the least you can do is watch me survive it. They stood across the throne room from each other, neither willing to close the distance, because closing it would make the next 3 weeks unbearable. Selene nodded once, then left, and Draven stood alone in a throne room that suddenly felt colder than any dungeon. Outside, bells started ringing. Not warning bells, victory bells. The Empire was celebrating survival. Inside Blackmere Citadel, a king prepared to sacrifice the only thing that had ever made him feel human. And somewhere in the city below, a woman who'd changed the fate of an empire by falling asleep in the wrong bed prepared to watch the man she loved marry someone else to save everyone except themselves. The crown always collected its debts. This time, the currency was hearts instead of blood. But the cost was exactly the same. 21 days. That's how long it took for a king to learn that surviving wasn't the same thing as living. Draven spent the first week after Wolf's Tooth Pass rebuilding what the war had destroyed. Supply chains, territory governance, military command structures that had fractured under pressure. He worked from dawn until his eyes wouldn't focus anymore, then worked through the night because sleep meant dreaming about choices he couldn't take back. The political marriage proposal sat on his desk like a coiled snake. Every morning he looked at it, every night he left it unanswered. Because answering meant admitting that the Empire had won, that after everything he'd fought for, every system he'd tried to dismantle, every person he'd tried to save, the crown would still collect its price in the currency it always demanded. Sacrifice disguised as duty. Selene had kept her word. She stayed in the Citadel, operating from the shadows the way she always had, building networks among servants, gathering information, becoming the eyes and ears Draven needed to understand what his empire was actually thinking versus what nobles reported in council meetings. They saw each other in hallways, in council chambers, in moments that lasted seconds before duty pulled them in opposite directions. They didn't speak, because speaking meant acknowledging what was about to happen, and neither of them had found words for that kind of ending yet. On the 8th day, the rebel territories sent a representative. Her name was Alara Thorne, and she was Vaeric's niece. Draven met her in the throne room with every instinct screaming that this was a trap, that the Chancellor's bloodline wouldn't forgive what happened in that clearing. That acceptance was just another word for revenge served cold. But Alara didn't look like revenge. She looked tired, mid-30s, with her uncle's sharp eyes, but none of his calculated cruelty. She wore simple traveling clothes instead of noble finery. When she knelt before the throne, it was perfunctory, mechanical, like someone going through motions they'd stopped believing in. Draven gestured for her to rise. Your message said the territories would end their rebellion if I agreed to a political marriage, he said. I assume you're the bride. Alara's expression didn't change. I am the offering, she corrected. Whether I'm a bride or a prisoner depends on how you choose to see me. Draven studied her. You're Vaeric's family. I killed him. I know, Alara said. I was there, hidden in the tree line, watching. The throne room went silent. Then why would you agree to this? Draven asked. Because my uncle was a brilliant manipulator who believed control was the only thing that mattered, Alara said. And I spent 20 years watching that belief destroy everyone he touched. She took a step closer. The territories didn't rebel because we hated you, she continued. We rebelled because we were terrified of what happened when rulers stopped seeing people as numbers. Because change is scarier than oppression when oppression is all you've ever known. Her eyes met his. But then we watched you fight at Wolf's Tooth Pass, she said. Not from a throne room, not from behind walls. You bled beside servants and soldiers and people who had every reason to hate you, and we realized something. What? That maybe the monster we'd been taught to fear was just a man trying to survive a system designed to destroy anyone with a conscience. Draven was quiet for a long time. "This doesn't change what I did to your uncle," he said. "No," Elara agreed, "but it changes what I'm willing to do to make sure his death wasn't for nothing." She straightened. "The territories will recognize your authority if you marry me," she said. "We'll end the rebellion. We'll integrate into your reformed governance structure. And in exchange, I get a voice in how that structure develops. Real power, not decorative." Draven's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?"
"Then we go back to war," Elara said. "And everyone who survived Wolf's Tooth Pass died for nothing." She turned to leave, but stopped at the threshold. "For what it's worth," she said without looking back, "I don't expect you to love me. I don't even expect you to like me. I just expect you to understand that sometimes duty is the price we pay for the privilege of trying to be better than what came before." Then she left, and Draven sat alone on a throne that felt heavier than mountains.
That night, he found Selene in the western wing. She was standing at the window where he used to watch the city, her silhouette carved from moonlight and exhaustion. "You're going to accept," she said without turning. "How did you know I was here?" "I always know." Draven crossed to stand beside her. They were quiet for a long time. Then Selene said, "She's not what I expected." "Neither was I," Draven replied. "When you first met me." "That's different." "Why?" "Because you were already breaking," Selene said. "She's still whole." "Nobody who offers themselves as a political sacrifice is whole," Draven said. He looked at her. "I don't want to do this." "I know, but if I don't, the war continues. More people die. Everything we fought for collapses." "I know that too." Selene finally turned to face him. "So do it," she said. "Marry her. Build your reformed empire. Create the thing you've been bleeding for." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "And I'll stay," she continued. "Like you asked. I'll be the person who reminds you what you were fighting for when the weight of the crown makes you forget." Draven reached for her hand. She let him take it. "This isn't fair," he said. "No," Selene agreed. "But you taught me something in the months since I fell asleep in your bed. Fair is a luxury for people who have choices. The rest of us just survive the best way we know how." She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "You should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow starts the negotiations. You'll need your strength." She walked toward the door. Draven's voice stopped her. "Do you regret it? Meeting me?" Selene looked back. "Every single day," she said, then softer, "and I'd do it all again." She left. And Draven stood in the chamber where everything had started, understanding finally that some love stories didn't end with triumph. They ended with two people choosing the world over themselves because that's what it meant to be human instead of monsters. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks. Not enough time to grieve what was ending, too much time to pretend it wasn't happening. Draven threw himself into governance with brutal efficiency. He met with territory representatives, reformed tribute laws, established councils that gave common people voice in decisions that affected their lives, dismantled corrupt systems that had survived centuries by being too entrenched to question. The empire transformed. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. People who'd spent their lives being ground into dust suddenly had paths to something better. Debt servitude was abolished. Forced labor ended. The Citadel's dungeons, once filled with people whose only crime was poverty, stood empty. Blackmere stopped being a place people feared. It became a place people believed in. And in the middle of that transformation, a king prepared to marry someone he barely knew to preserve everything he'd built. Elara proved herself useful almost immediately. She understood territory politics in ways Draven never would, knew which nobles were genuinely committed to reform and which were waiting for opportunities to rebuild old power structures. She was sharp, practical, and completely uninterested in playing games. After 2 weeks of working together, Draven realized something uncomfortable. He liked her, not the way he loved Selene. That was something carved into his bones that would never fully heal. But Elara was someone he could respect, someone who saw the crown as a tool for change instead of a symbol of dominance, someone who understood that power without purpose was just violence dressed in ceremony.
They could build something together. It would never be what he wanted, but it might be what the Empire needed. Selene watched from the edges. She'd become a ghost in her own life, present but not visible, there during council meetings but never speaking, close enough to observe but far enough that nobody questioned why a former servant was still in the Citadel. Draven saw her everywhere, in corridors, in doorways, in moments between decisions when he looked up expecting to see someone else and found her instead. Their eyes would meet. Neither would speak. Then duty would pull them apart again. It was the cruelest thing either of them had ever experienced. Being close enough to touch, but knowing touch, would destroy the fragile control keeping them both functional. 1 week before the wedding, Nessa found Selene in the servant quarters. The girl looked different, thinner, older, the kind of aging that happened when guilt ate you from the inside. "I'm sorry," Nessa said, "for the 100th time, for everything." Selene was packing her things. Not much. Servants never accumulated much. "I know," she said without looking up. "Will you ever forgive me?" Selene stopped packing. She looked at the girl who'd been her only friend in this place, who'd betrayed her because powerful men had convinced her betrayal was duty, who'd spent months drowning in remorse for choices she couldn't take back. "I already have," Selene said. "Forgiveness is easy. It's forgetting that's impossible." Nessa's face crumpled. "I didn't know it would hurt you this much." "That's the problem with betrayal," Selene said. "You never know the damage until it's already done." She returned to packing. Nessa watched for a moment, then asked, "Are you leaving?" "After the wedding," Selene said. "The king asked me to stay, but staying means watching him build a life with someone else. I'm not strong enough for that." "Where will you go?" "South," Selene said. "There's a settlement that doesn't answer to the Dominion. I'll find work. Start over. Pretend the last few months were a dream instead of a war." Nessa nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," she said, "he still loves you. Everyone can see it. The way he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching, like you're the only real thing in a room full of performances." Selene's hand stilled. "That makes it worse," she said quietly. 2 days before the wedding, the nightmares started. Draven woke in darkness, heart hammering, hands reaching for a woman who wasn't there. The wolf inside him was restless, pacing, confused why the presence that had brought peace was slipping away. He tried to sleep again. Couldn't. So he walked. The Citadel at night was different, quieter, more honest. Torches burned low in sconces that had witnessed centuries of kings making choices they'd regret by morning. Draven's feet carried him to the western wing, to the chamber where everything had changed. The door was open. Inside, Selene sat on the edge of the massive bed, staring at nothing. She didn't look up when he entered. "Can't sleep either?" Draven asked. "Haven't slept properly in weeks," Selene said. Draven crossed the room and sat beside her. Not touching, just close. "Do you remember the first night," he asked, "when you fell asleep here by accident?" "I remember thinking I was going to die," Selene said. "That the monster stories were real, and I'd made a fatal mistake." "What changed your mind?" "You did," she said, "when you woke up and the first thing you asked was if I was hurt. Not who I was, not what I was doing there, just if I was okay." She looked at him. "That's when I realized the monster was just a man who'd been alone so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as human." Draven's throat was tight. "You saved me," he said, in ways that had nothing to do with sleep. Selene's hand found his. "And you destroyed yourself trying to save everyone else," she said. "That's what good kings do. They burn so their kingdoms don't have to." They sat in silence. Then Draven said, "Come with me." He stood and pulled her to her feet. "Where?" "Anywhere but here." They left the Citadel through passages only Draven knew, emerged into the city as dawn broke over buildings that had survived wars and plagues and centuries of rulers who'd cared more about power than people. Draven led Selene through streets that were just waking, past merchants setting up stalls, past children playing in alleys, past people living lives that had nothing to do with thrones or empires or the desperate choices of kings. They climbed to the highest point in the city, a tower that overlooked everything, and Draven showed her what he'd been building. "Look," he said, pointing at the streets below. "See that district? 3 months ago it was slums where people starved because tribute taxes took everything. Now it's got food distribution, medical care, schools.
He gestured to another area. That's where we're building housing for people whose debts were forgiven. Real houses, not cells. His hand swept across the skyline. The Empire is changing, he said. Not because I forced it, because people finally believe they deserve better. He turned to Selene. You did this, he said. You and everyone like you who refused to accept that survival meant surrendering humanity. Selene's eyes were wet. You're giving me credit for your war. I'm giving you credit for reminding me why wars are worth fighting, Draven said. He took both her hands. In 2 days I marry Alara, he said. I'll honor that commitment. I'll build the partnership she deserves. I'll be the king this empire needs. He pulled her closer. But you need to know something, he said. Every choice I make from this moment forward, every reform I fight for, every person I protect instead of exploit, will be because you showed me what it looked like to value human life over power. His forehead touched hers. You won't be beside me, he said, but you'll be in every decision, every law, every moment when I have to choose between being a monster and being a man. Tears ran down Selene's face. That's not enough, she whispered. I know, Draven said, but it's all I have to give. They stood like that as sun rose over a city that had been reborn from blood and choices that cost everything. Then Selene pulled back. I need to leave before the wedding, she said. I can't watch. I know. Will you be okay? Draven's smile was broken. No, he said, but I'll survive. That's what alphas do. And you? Will you be okay? Selene touched his face one last time. Eventually, she said, in a few decades. Maybe. She started to walk away. Draven's voice stopped her. Selene, she turned. Thank you, he said, for seeing the man when everyone else saw the wolf. Selene's expression cracked. Thank you for proving the man was worth saving. Then she left. And Draven stood alone watching the city wake up, understanding that leadership wasn't about being the strongest person in the room. It was about being willing to break yourself so others didn't have to. The wedding day arrived with bells and ceremony. The throne room had been transformed into something that didn't look like a battlefield for once. Flowers imported from territories that had been at war a month ago. Nobles wearing expressions that ranged from genuine support to barely concealed calculation. People filled galleries not because they loved their king, but because they wanted to witness the moment that would define the Empire's future. Draven stood at the altar in formal armor that felt like a cage. Alara appeared in the doorway wearing a dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and practical, a perfect metaphor for who she was. She walked down the aisle without hesitation, and when she reached him, her expression was steady. No illusions about what this was, no pretense it was anything except duty. The ceremony was efficient, words spoken by officials who'd survived 3 regime changes and would likely survive 3 more. Vows exchanged that promised partnership instead of love. Rings that symbolized alliance instead of devotion. When it was over, Draven kissed his new wife with the same mechanical precision he'd used to sign treaties. The throne room erupted in applause. The empire had its stability, the territories had their voice, and the king had sacrificed the only thing he'd ever wanted for the future he believed everyone deserved. That night, Draven stood in the western wing, staring at a bed that would never feel the same. Alara appeared in the doorway. She didn't enter, just watched him for a moment, then said, I'm not going to pretend I don't know what you lost to make this happen. Draven turned to face her. It's not your burden to carry, he said. Maybe not, Alara agreed. But I'm not stupid enough to believe this marriage is about love. So let's establish something right now. She took a step into the room. I'll be your partner in governance, she said. I'll be your ally in reform. I'll stand beside you in councils and negotiations and every moment when the Empire tries to drag you back to what you used to be. She paused. But I won't be the person who makes you forget her. I won't compete with a ghost. And I won't ask you to pretend something that isn't real. Draven stared at her. What are you saying? I'm saying we build something honest, Alara said. A partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. Not a love story. Not a fairy tale. Just 2 people trying to change a system that resists change. She met his eyes. And if that means you keep a part of yourself locked away because it belongs to someone else, then that's the price I pay for choosing this path. Draven felt something shift in his chest. Not love, but something close to gratitude. You're too good for this, he said.
Probably, Alara agreed. But so are you. And maybe together we can be good enough. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, she said, I hope she finds something worth living for. Because anyone who could make the Alpha King remember how to be human deserves a life that doesn't revolve around him. She left, and Draven stood alone, understanding that some endings weren't tragic, they were just complicated. Miles south of the capital, Selene reached the settlement that didn't answer to the Dominion. It was small, quiet, the kind of place where people asked few questions and accepted whatever story you told about your past. She found work in a healer's house. Nothing glamorous, just grinding herbs and changing bandages and learning to exist in a world where her choices didn't affect kingdoms. At night, she stood at the edge of the settlement looking north toward a city she'd never returned to, and wondered if the king was sleeping, if he'd found peace, if the empire they'd bled for was actually changing, or if it had already started sliding back toward comfortable cruelty. She'd never know. That was the price of walking away. But sometimes survival meant accepting you'd never get answers to the questions that haunted you. 5 years passed. The Iron Dominion transformed in ways that shocked everyone who'd predicted it would collapse the moment Draven stopped ruling through fear. Tribute systems remained abolished. Territory councils gave common people voice in governance. The Citadel's dungeons stayed empty except for people who'd actually committed crimes instead of just being poor. Draven kept his promise. Every law he signed, every reform he implemented, every moment when he had to choose between convenience and conscience, he chose the harder path. Because a servant girl had once shown him that leadership wasn't about being the strongest person in the room. It was about being willing to protect the weakest. Alara proved to be everything she'd promised. A partner, an ally, someone who shared the burden of trying to change systems that resisted change. Their marriage was professional, functional, occasionally even warm. But never what he'd had in the Western Wing 5 years ago. Some losses you learn to live with instead of heal from. On the anniversary of Wolf's Tooth Pass, Draven stood alone on the Citadel walls. Below him, the city celebrated with festivals that had nothing to do with war. Children played in streets that used to run with blood. Merchants traded goods that used to be taxed into scarcity. People lived lives that suggested maybe, just maybe, empires could survive being ruled by humans instead of monsters. A messenger approached. "Your Majesty," he said, "there's someone at the gate asking for you." Draven frowned. "Who?" "She wouldn't give a name," the messenger said. "Just said to tell you she fell asleep in the wrong bed once and wanted to make sure you were still sleeping through the night." Draven's heart stopped. He ran. Through corridors, downstairs, across courtyards, to the main gate where a figure stood silhouetted against afternoon sun. Older, weathered, but unmistakably her. Selene Vale had come home. They stood facing each other across 10 feet of stone. Neither moved. Then Selene said, "I heard the Empire didn't collapse." "Not yet," Draven replied. "Heard you're still trying to make it better." Trying being the key word. She took a step closer. "I thought staying away would make it easier," she said. "That distance would let me build a life that didn't revolve around you." "Did it work?" "No," Selene said. "Turns out you can't outrun the person who taught you what it felt like to be seen as human." Draven's hands clenched. "You left," he said, "for 5 years. No word, no message, nothing." "I know. Why come back now?" Selene looked at him with eyes that had seen their own wars. "Because I finally understood something you tried to teach me," she said. "That survival isn't enough. That existing without purpose is just a slower way of dying." She took another step. "And my purpose was never just surviving," she continued. "It was reminding a king that the weight of the crown doesn't have to crush everything human out of him." Draven felt something in his chest that had been locked away for 5 years start to crack open. "I'm married," he said. "I know. I made vows. I know that too." "Then why are you here?" "Because vows don't erase history," Selene said. "And history matters when you're trying to build a future worth living in." She closed the distance between them. "I'm not asking you to break your word," she said. "I'm asking if there's a place in this empire for someone who remembers what you were fighting for when everyone else forgets." Draven stared at her, then said, "Alara asked me once if I could keep a part of myself locked away because it belonged to someone else. I told her yes.
She said that was the price she paid for choosing this path. He reached out and touched Celine's face. But I don't think that part needs to stay locked, he said. I think it just needs to serve a different purpose. What purpose? Reminding me that the Empire is made of people like you, Draven said. People who survived systems designed to destroy them and still chose to believe things could be better. His hand dropped. Stay, he said. Not as what we were, as what we need to be. Partners in making sure this empire never forgets that the people who matter most are the ones the crown usually grinds into dust. Selene's eyes were wet. That's not enough. I know, Draven said, but it's real. And maybe real is more important than enough. They stood in the gate, two people who'd changed an empire by refusing to let it change them, who'd lost everything trying to save everyone, and who'd finally learned that some battles weren't won by choosing between love and duty. They were won by finding ways to serve both without destroying yourself completely. Selene nodded once, then I'll stay. And she did, not as the woman in the king's bed, as the voice that reminded him why beds mattered in the first place, why sleep was precious, why humanity was worth protecting even when the crown demanded you surrender it. Years later, when Draven was old and tired and the empire had survived longer than anyone predicted, someone asked him what he'd learned from decades of trying to change systems that resisted change. He thought for a long time, then said, "That power isn't about domination, it's about protection. And the strongest rulers aren't the ones who inspire fear. They're the ones who remember what it felt like to be afraid." The person asking frowned. "Where did you learn that?" "From a servant girl who fell asleep in the wrong bed," Draven said, "and taught a monster how to be a man." He looked out the window at a city that had been reborn from blood and choices that cost everything. "She saved my life," he said quietly. "But more importantly, she saved my humanity. And that made all the difference. Because empires rise and fall. Dynasties flourish and collapse. But the choice to protect humanity instead of exploit it survives in the laws you leave behind and the people you inspire to keep fighting after you're gone. The Iron Dominion didn't become perfect, but it became better. And that was enough. In the highest chamber of Blackmere Citadel, where silence once echoed like a prison, the Alpha King finally slept each night with peace beside him. Not the peace of having everything he wanted. The peace of knowing he'd chosen to be better than the crown demanded, even when it cost him everything he loved. And somewhere in the Citadel, a woman who'd once scrubbed floors invisible to everyone who mattered stood in council chambers advising rulers on laws that protected people like her. The empire survived, not because its ruler was the strongest beast alive, but because even the most dangerous king in the world discovered that the only force powerful enough to change the world was choosing humanity over dominance, every single day, no matter how much it cost. That was the legacy. Not conquest, not fear, just the stubborn refusal to let power turn you into the monster everyone expected. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.